Faites l'appel, s'il vous plaît, monsieur le greffier.
Monsieur le Senator Gorst. Monsieur le Senator Farnham.
Présent.
Madame la Senator Ferguson. Monsieur le Senator Lafondre.
Présent.
Madame la Senator Valois.
Present.
Madame la Senator Moore.
Present.
Monsieur le Senator Pallet.
Présent.
Monsieur le Senator Mezek.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Hélier.
Présent.
Madame la Connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Present.
Madame la Connétable de Saint-Sauveur. Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Brelade.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Grouville.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de la Trinité.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Sainte-Marie.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Ouen.
Présent.
Madame la Connétable de Saint-Martin. Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le Connétable de Saint-Clément. Madame la Deputy Martin.
Present.
Monsieur le Deputy Southern.
Présent.
Madame la Deputy de Grouville.
Present.
Monsieur le Deputy Lewis.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Tadier.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Higgins.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Masson.
Présent.
Madame la Deputy Pinel.
Present.
Monsieur le Deputy de Saint-Martin.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy de Saint-Ouen.
Présent.
Madame la Deputy Dublé. Monsieur le Deputy Labbe.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Wickenden.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy de Sainte-Marie.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Truscott.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Young.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Ash.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Morel.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Guida.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy de Saint-Pierre. Monsieur le Deputy de la Trinité.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Legra.
Present.
Monsieur le Deputy Aye.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Pershard. Monsieur le Deputy Ward.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Alves.
Present.
Monsieur le Deputy Pamplin.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Gardner.
Monsieur le doyen.
Notre soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait les cieux et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi le gouvernement et la puissance de la terre, pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions qu'il te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir le cœur et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, de les conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit que toute leur délibération est accompagnée de la bénédiction. Réussisse au bien du soulagement du peuple, qu'il te plût que mettre à leur soin. Car nous t'en prions au nom et par le mérite de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné à t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui est aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne. Ta volonté soit faite dans la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien et nous pardonne nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous envoie point en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal. Car toi est la reine, la puissance de la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen.
Monsieur le Senator Gorst.
Defo.
Sorry, I beg your pardon. I was giving way for the assistant, but I understand that Senator Gorst has been away on state's business. He's due back this morning and will be returning to the Assembly this afternoon, as I understand it. Sorry for being late.
Not at all. State,
My apologies.
state's business. Very well.
Madame la Senator Ferguson. Préjuré que Madame la Senator Ferguson est tellement indisposée qu'elle ne peut pas assister au tâches en exposer sa santé. Madame la Connétable de Saint-Sauveur. Madame la Deputy Dubé,
Present.
Madame la Deputy Pershard,
Sir, Deputy Pershard is absent due to parental responsibilities.
Parental responsibility, yes. Les états sont constitués. Very well, we now continue with the debate on P72. And does any member wish to speak? I beg your pardon, Deputy Martin, did you wish to, you indicated that you wanted to say something at the beginning of the assembly.
Well, I wasn't sure. I think I may have misled Deputy Ward yesterday in questions notice when we were talking about the raising the contributions of long-term care, and then I got a question on social security. I may have inadvertently said that long-term care was only on higher earners. That was for parental benefits, was put on higher earners, and we raised the ceiling to 250,000. I just wanted to clarify if there was any confusion. I didn't mean to mislead. I was thinking on my feet or on my sitting. Oh,
Thank you very much indeed. Very well, we now resume the debate on P72. Indicating in the chat a desire to speak is Conatable St Martin.
Thank you, sir. I will be voting for this vote of censure against the government. Yes, we are all in a pandemic, but that's no excuse. We cannot use a pandemic to excuse all our behaviours, and we cannot use a pandemic for not carrying through. Yesterday, the Minister for Home Affairs said in the Assembly that we in the Assembly are all perceived to be in the government. Well, in actual fact, the Council of Ministers of the government and the rest of us are in scrutiny, whose duty is to be a critical friend and hold the government to account. This is what we are doing. If by chance some of the electorate believe that we have all been censured, so be it. I have no problem in admitting that, yes, the government could do better on so many fronts. They could listen more and be more inclusive. If, as the Minister says, we are all members of the government, then could I please have a pass for Broad Street? Could those of us not in the Council of Ministers have a pass instead of being left in reception whilst meetings start? The Minister mentioned 100 reports have been written. That is impressive. In scrutiny, we have the most amazing scrutiny and research and project officers who write excellent and incisive reports. I asked a couple of people yesterday whether they would be voting for this. They said no, because it was brought by Reform, a party. The trouble is, we now have a growing number of parties. So if a proposition is brought by Reform, Alliance or Progress, does that mean that I, as an independent, cannot vote as it's being brought by a party? That is a nonsense. This censure is deserved by the government, and if I'm deemed to be part of that by virtue of being in the Assembly, so be it. We should never be complacent. The government can do better, and we can all do better, and we can all take time to reflect, and we can all do better whether there is a pandemic on or not. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Conatable. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Labby.
Thank you, sir, and I apologise I'm not with you in person today. It was my intention to be, but I've developed a cough overnight and it would be unwise to come in under those circumstances. I'm sure you'll agree. I think it was in May or June of this year that I found myself at the Radisson Hotel for what I thought was a lunch with the chairman of Andym Homes, Richard McCarthy, but when I turned up, there was over 20 people waiting there, sitting around a large table. It was a meeting of the board of directors plus the board of management, and there was one empty chair there for me, and everyone was sitting eagerly awaiting my presentation. So I just thought, well, let's start at the beginning. A good place to start, and I said who I was and that I was very new to being a minister and relatively new to being a politician, and that I'd been elected in 2014 and spent the first 18 months of my life as a politician in a bitter and bloody battle with Andym Homes. And members will remember, broke the ice, members will remember that some members who were there at the time will remember that series of debates on saving a piece of protected open green space on Green Street in the low-rise development, and it's a debate I won with support from my colleagues, and that was a cause for great celebration. And time went on, and the government did nothing to enact it, and they did, and it was a. By the way, I keep thinking about the constable, the deputy of St Martin, when I bring this story up again, because he always looks at me across the chamber with spaniel eyes, and I don't want to. I have to say I don't hold the deputy of St Martin to blame, and he was the only minister who had the decency and courtesy to call me up when this became transparent and apparent, and apologise. But effectively, that was a conscious act of the government to do nothing to enact a decision of the Assembly, an emphatic decision, hard-won decision of the Assembly, and very got a lot of publicity. And I thought that was disgraceful at the time, and I still do, and damaging to the Assembly. What we have in front of us today is something entirely different. The government are late on delivery of one part of a three-part proposition, for which apologies and some explanations have been made. And there is no intention not to fulfill the decision of the Assembly. It's just because of a set of circumstances, and you get this with planning a lot, there's a delay. So with respect to the previous speaker and to Senator Messick himself, who's got the moral high ground here, and I apologise reservedly, no ifs, no buts, but I don't think this merits a vote of censure. I think it's a completely different scenario to the one I explained just now. As to my involvement with the South Hill development, I remember opening the pages of the JEP to see the development, and immediately writing to my officers and said in an email, can this be the last time that the Minister for Housing and Communities learns about a housing development from a government agency from the pages of the JEP? And it is a example, I think, crystallizes a sort of problem that I've identified with the Office of Minister for Housing. And I think this has been, by the way, this is absolutely no criticism of any individual, certainly not any of the previous housing ministers, for whom I have renewed admiration, given that I now realise the difficulty of the job that they had to do in their time. And I think that I can remember a prevailing attitude in the 2014-2018 term. That was just after the 2013 creation of Andium Homes, who, out they went from the government officers off to their own. Effectively, the whole department became arm's length and Andium Homes. And it seems to me that a void was created there. And as I say, a sort of prevailing attitude of like, well, do we need a housing minister? And what do they do now? And I think it's sort of, this has been worrying me since I took over in February, and I want to make it my goal and aim, and I'm doing so now, to redefine and re-emphasize the role of the housing minister, because for Jersey, the housing minister is absolutely crucially and vitally important. And I'm helped in this by my predecessor's Policy Development Board and the recommendation, for starters, to create a housing strategy and regeneration function, team, looking at the what's coming down the pipeline, making sure that pipeline stretches further into the future, making sure we are managing demand to the best of our ability and providing supply. And they will be doing other work also, excuse me. Now, fortunately, I mean, it was the Group Director of Strategy and Innovation brilliant Mr. Skelton, who said, look, if we why don't we do an interim appointment for the team leader so we can get this up and running as soon as possible? And that's happened. I jumped on the idea. We've appointed the team leader, Deborah Reeve, who I'm excited for the Assembly to meet, and I'll arrange that. Couldn't be more perfect fit for that role, coming as she does from the Isle of Man, and having run housing there. So similar situation. So that's up and running. And I think that's going to help us, and either by regulation or by introducing a new custom or tradition, everything that Angium, sorry, States of Jersey Development Company, now the Ports of Jersey, if they're going into accommodation and housing development, they need to bring that to the Housing Strategy and Regeneration Group and myself and Deborah Weaver at birth, not at conception, not at birth, from the very beginning. And I think that's going to help. So we're all on the same page. The relationship between SOJDC and government is not through the housing minister. It seems to have developed through, of course, the Treasury shareholder representative, Deputy Ash, but also I think their main point of contact is the Regeneration Steering Group, which, if you remember, no longer, when I took office, contained a seat for the housing minister. And I've stopped that, and I'm on it. But we need to, it is desperately important that we need to strengthen these relationships and the role of the housing minister at the very beginning. And I mean, I'm interested to see the work that the scrutiny panel I answer to, Constable Jackson's scrutiny panel, are doing a very timely piece of work on affordability. And it's interesting to read some of the representations that they've received already from industry. One of them was the top bullet list, to help solve the housing crisis, was to reconstitute the old housing forum, which I think last sat in 1989, bringing all industry and government and the main players in housing together to share and talk and share experiences. And that we are doing too. Its first meeting will be held on the 29th of September this year. And we've had a fantastic reaction from all those we've invited. And I think that's a really, really important thing. And of course, to strengthen the whole political leadership of housing. And that also will be done with, we've already started with the political oversight group. So those are good building blocks. It's difficult. We all know we've got a huge problem, multifaceted, complex problem of immense proportions as regards housing on our island. And I remember finding it very difficult in the first few ministerial meetings. I was being pressed by officers from the list they've drawn up to choose the priorities to work on for the rest of my term. And I kept evading the answer. And I think they must have thought, oh, we've got to write one here. We're never going to get a decision out of him. And eventually, I think it was a meeting 3 or 4. I said, listen, I want to do them all. I can't pick and choose. And so they said, right, OK, we'll schedule it. We'll try and get them all scheduled, at least started if we can. But then, and so you've got your program. We got the Creating Better Homes action plan sorted. But in this job, as I suppose any ministerial job, there are events that happen and can mean a reprioritization. For instance, the latest housing price index should set that came out middle of August and delayed any holiday that I was intending to take, because it struck me that should ring massive alarm bells. There's been since 2017 a spike in prices.
Deputy, I'm sorry to interrupt, but could you assist me with how this is directly relevant to the motion of censure?
I want to explain that from the housing point of view, we are immensely busy. We are working methodically through a huge workload. We are not in panic mode. We are stretched, but we are coping, and we are bringing in new ideas. This is a huge body of work. I know nobody's underestimated. The only silver cloud, sir, is that it has got this difficult, and the only silver cloud is now there is, I think, widespread recognition in government that housing is a top priority. So we are working our socks off. I am sorry that this happened. I do believe the Constable of St Martin should be careful. If you want to give the government a kicking, that's fine, and I did it plenty of times myself in the past. But there is collateral damage. There is a drop in morale over the last few days in Broad Street amongst officers who will take this to heart and who will feel that they've let their ministers down because this has happened. Well, my officers from day one have supported, nay, carried me, and are working 100%, care deeply, and they have not in any shape or form let me down, and I'm sure other ministers feel 100% the same. So that is all I have to say. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much indeed. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition?
Sir, I put something in chat. I hope it's there. It's definitely.
No, I'm afraid I can't see anything in chat.
I may be on the wrong.
You say good morning all, but then nothing after that on my chat.
Sorry, sir. I put speak, please.
It's just appeared now. Very well. Yes, Deputy Higgins.
Okay, thank you, sir. And can I just say at the start, this is not a prepared speech, but a number of observations. And as members know, I don't mince words. Like many members, I get extremely frustrated with the Council of Ministers. Not just this Council of Ministers, but all previous Council of Ministers that I've experienced in the 13 years I've been in the States, with regard to promises made, undertakings given, and dates given for action. This is not new and points to a systemic failing in the way the States operate as a whole. And it's my belief that this is a matter for Privileges and Procedures Committee to address with the Council of Ministers rather than a vote of censure, although it does highlight the issue. I also believe that those who bring forward such propositions and who are likely to support it should look at their own actions whilst in government or as scrutiny chairman. I hate hypocrisy, and the old adage that people who live in glass houses should not throw stones is applicable here. I can criticise, for example, the former Home Affairs Minister and her Assistant Minister for not doing anything about the allegations of corruption in the planning department, even when they were shown proof of perjury, perversion of the course of justice and misconduct in public office, which ultimately led to the Norfolk police investigation, which has been undertaken over the last 3 years. That was no thanks to their inaction. I can criticise the former Children's Minister for not answering emails from members of the public who were crying out for help, who then approached me for assistance, or my own scrutiny chairman for failing to address the Jersey Way and kicking the can down the road. I'm also concerned that this is pure electioneering almost 10 months before the election and is likely to become the norm going forward. I also lament the politicisation of scrutiny. I passionately believe in scrutiny, but I believe it's being used as political opposition and has been for almost 3 years in some cases. I'm particularly critical of the Scrutiny Liaison Committee, whose job it was to coordinate the activities of the various scrutiny panels, but is now being used to bring propositions in its own right, and the president or chairman of the committee the media as the head of scrutiny or leader of the opposition.
Deputy, I understand the occasional value in making the rhetorical point that other people are not immune from criticism. But I think to go through an entire list of things that you don't like within the Assembly in order to criticise the censure is taking that rhetorical device too far, and it doesn't appear to me to be directly relevant to the proposition. I'd be grateful if you could bring it back to topic.
Sir, you'll be delighted to know I've got to my very last sentence where it says, in conclusion, I ask members to reject this proposition and ask PPC to deal with this matter as a matter of urgency, and for the Council of Ministers to address the housing issue, which is, in my view, a crime. Thank you, sir.
Senator Gorse.
Thank you, sir. And I wonder if I could just perhaps correct the record to start with. I think I was marked as out of the island on state's business.
You were.
Earlier, I was in a prior meeting which overran with a visitor to the island, so if that could be corrected. And I also would inform the Assembly that I must leave later this morning for a funeral. Can I say, sir, and I'm pleased to follow the last speaker, because this parliamentary term has been in existence now for well over 3 years. And in fact, I think we can already see, sir, not the mover of the proposition, that it would be unfair to lay this at his door, but I think we can already see members of the Assembly gearing up for June next year. And it's never a pleasant time of any parliamentary term, sir, when we are gearing up for an election in that way. And so the last speaker's rhetorical device of each one of us putting their hand up and admitting that we have not done enough either individually or as an assembly or as a government to deal with what some have referred to as the housing crisis. And I know others have demurred from that term, but for my part, sir, it is time that we refer to it as a housing crisis, and that we come together as an assembly, and I know that the new housing minister is seeking to do that with the plan that he has recently published, and discuss the policies and the legislative changes and the action that needs to be taken to deal with that crisis. And I think that the mover of this proposition is shaking his head, sir, but I think he does believe there is a housing crisis. He and I, he's saying he does, sir, so he, like me, has been in the government for a number of years. So if there is a housing crisis, let us argue on the issues that need to be addressed and the actions that need to be taken to deal with that housing crisis. Because he and I won't agree on all of the actions, sir, but let's argue about the actions, because that taking action is what will lead us towards helping to resolve that crisis. And for my part, there's very little that should be off the table in dealing with this crisis. We should not underestimate how impossible it feels to young people and to young families that they can never ever see a way onto the housing ladder in the island in which they were born, in the island in which they now call home, in the island in which they would like to see a future and they feel part of the community, but they have no hope of that future. And they are therefore questioning their role in its future. So I say we can blame each other, and I put my hands up, having been in this assembly for a long time. We have not done enough. We've not done enough soon enough. Other ministers have outlined what has been undertaken, what has been done, what is being done. There can be no doubt that this particular item that the Assembly voted for and the timescale in which it asked for it to be done has not been done. There's no getting away from that. And I, for my part in government, apologise for that. So the question, sir, for the Assembly today is that sufficient to support a vote of censure in the way that the mover of the proposition has outlined? And for some, sir, they might feel that, well, they've come to the end of their tether and any motion is as good as another to, as some of the speakers said, to kick the government into action. I believe that the government has already been kicked into action, and it doesn't meet the threshold to vote for a vote of censure. Rather, so we should come together in these last few months, take the action that can be taken, reach agreement where it can be reached, and start to give hope that to our community. And so, sir, I ask that members don't support this vote of censure. Accept that the government admits it hasn't met the timeline, but come together and commit to take the action which is required. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Deputy Truscott.
Yes, thank you, sir. Just for the record, I have an underlying health condition. That's why I'm nodding. The excuse me, frog in my throat. I wasn't going to speak on this, but I think it's important, and I a great deal of sympathy with Senator Menzies for bringing this. And it has happened before in the past in the previous Assembly, where the will and the decision of the Assembly is, for whatever reason, really not taken traction. One could argue been ignored and just left to drift. And quite frankly, that's not acceptable. And I join the Constable of St John, who's only been in, his seat for, it seems, a few months now, but he's realised that the system isn't really quite what it should be. And I'm amazed that, there isn't a simple mechanism in place that, and I just to correct that, there was, when I was Assistant Minister at Social Security, there was a system in place where we had one of the officers, they would listen into the debate, they would pick up the points, they would note them, and then they would be acted upon going forward. And so that we would miss nothing and would respond with courtesy. And I think here is the crux and one of the issues, courtesy to keep members informed of what's happening, what is being worked upon. And I think that's the only thing that has been missing in this process is a courtesy to be shown to a member. And yes, as a backbencher, it is, and particularly, and I'm sure some would agree, for reform members to get propositions through, to show that member and that individual a courtesy to say exactly where things are with regard to action. So I'm pleased to hear that PPC are looking at introducing some kind of mechanism. All we require as backbenchers, and as you say, it's hard enough to get stuff going forward, but just that courtesy, that professional, and just don't want to lose my thread here, and that that assurance that something is being done. So I really I won't be voting with the senator on this, but I think the government should take it as a warning, a shot across the bow that standards have got to improve. And I think that's the important message that should go out this morning, that really deal with the will of the Assembly and respect it and treat it with the reverence that it deserves. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy. Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. The issue here is not just the issue before us in terms of as the Comptable de St John said yesterday, the very narrow focus of this proposition. The issue is, as Deputy Truscott has just laid out, the problem of government, and to be honest, not just this government, but previous governments too, ignoring the will of the Assembly, whether on purpose or by accident, because there just was too much work to do. Either way, I think many of us in this room today agree that government often ignores the will of the Assembly. And that is not, in my view, a place that we should ever allow the government to be. I don't feel that, well, no, I strongly feel that the Assembly is the supreme lawmaking body of this island. It is not just the lawmaking body, it is the body overseen with good conduct of the government of this island. But, as was argued earlier by the proposer and by others, we find the Assembly too often toothless in its ability to reprimand any government that isn't delivering as the Assembly has asked it to do so. And because, as much as anything, we are caught between two things: a vote of confidence, in which case government, is removed and new government is put in. And people have heard me back in November saying how it wasn't the right time. It's a nuclear option. It's too much at times. In that case, it's because of the impending Brexit transition and the pandemic. It wasn't a good time to throw Jersey's government into confusion, regardless of your thoughts on the government itself of the day. Or you have a vote of censure, which people say is toothless because it doesn't actually do anything. It's a metaphorical slap across the wrist. We have aspects such as the CNAG. The CNAG can make recommendations, but they can be ignored by government because the CNAG has no power to enforce recommendations or to reprimand the government. We have scrutiny. Scrutiny provides reports. One previous speaker talked about the politicization of scrutiny. Well, the trouble is, anyone who disagrees with the scrutiny report, whether it's in praise of or criticizing the government, is going to say that scrutiny is politicized because they just haven't followed the road that that particular deputy or senator wishes them to have followed. And so scrutiny itself can bring no other motion than a vote of censure or vote of confidence. And to my knowledge, I don't think a vote of confidence has ever succeeded because it is a nuclear option. And vote of censures, I genuinely don't know. I can't recall one myself succeeding, but there are members of the Assembly who have been here a lot longer than I have. But regardless of the narrowness of this particular proposition, government does need to know that the Assembly has some teeth, that the Assembly is supreme on this island, and the government answers to the Assembly. We are moving to an election where we know there will be more parties. Some of those parties have the explicit aim of wanting to get a clear majority, 25 seats in this Assembly, a clear majority. Well, if that's so, no vote of censure will ever be won. No vote of confidence will ever be won. The Assembly will be rendered toothless. And as we look forward to that potential future, I sit here today thinking, okay, maybe this isn't the perfect scenario for the vote of censure. Maybe the government has learnt. But when I spoke in November on the vote of confidence, I said words very similar to Senator Gorst's, which were the government must listen, the government must change its tune and must act and move and step up to answer the Assembly. It didn't do so, because if it had, we wouldn't be in this situation today. We heard Deputy Pamplin talking about elements of his proposition which led to the Stack minutes being released, but other elements of his proposition which weren't adhered to. There are examples of deputies and senators around and constables around this room where their propositions have not been adhered to. And I just don't think it can go on. I feel that the Assembly needs to step up, needs to show that it is not just a body which accepts anything time and time again. Now, what does the vote of censure do? Well, it just formally tells the government you weren't good enough in this area. I'm going to do a speech after this in my own proposition, which again, I believe will be highlighting how the Assembly is rendered toothless. And I can't accept that anymore. I am a proud defender of this Assembly. I'm a States member first. Every other position I hold comes second to that role. And as a States member, I do not want to see this Assembly being undermined time and time again, whether it's intentional or unintentional. The undermining of this Assembly should not happen and must not happen. And so whilst it's reluctant, I am likely to support this proposition because I think the government needs to see that the Assembly can act and do something. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? No other member wishes to speak. Deputy Martin.
Thank you, sir. And in these sort of debates, you think, shall I, has enough been said? But I can't let that last speech go, sir. I absolutely agree. After being here nearly 22 years, sir, this Assembly is the decision maker. This government does not and never has and never will hold this Assembly in contempt. I've never met a Chief Minister who tries to embody everything. If there's an amendment, if there's a recommendation, we speak around the Council of Ministers, and the senator across the room can look at me in the eye, sir, as if I'm not telling the truth. I am. We try to accommodate everything. This is to do with timelines, sir. This is to do, we had over 3,000 cases of corona. The Chief Minister had to go on holiday the day this was, the censure vote was lodged, sir. After much needed 70 hours or 80 hours a week they have been doing. I and Social Security were in those sort of hours in the first 3 months, not so much, but the Chief Minister, everything that comes across his and his officers' chairs, desk is debated. I was going to speak, and I recorded Channel last night when I saw Senator Mesic on Channel Television. He basically said this council didn't like the Assembly's decision, and they will be dragged kicking and screaming to do it. That's absolute rubbish, sir. Absolute rubbish. Now, I know you've made some rulings, sir, on what is pertinent to a vote of censure, and it's not a slap on the wrist. That's why it's defended very, very strongly in this Assembly. Last night, I was absolutely ashamed that we stood and left in the middle of a vote of censure, because to me, it is a vote of confidence. And if you really think that we should have done that, we did. We are where we are. Totally wrong. There is no such thing as a slap on the wrist. We try and try again to make sure the Assembly is listened to. What can we accommodate, and we do it in the timeline. Things have got in our way. I've heard from the proposer yesterday. I know you've made rulings, sir. When he proposed it, he said this government hasn't introduced FOI, which was 3 governments ago, onto arm's length bodies. But the vote of censure is a narrow part B of 165, a very narrow part. We do agree. What this government can't do, and I think if you was listening to the housing minister, is can't do anything that will make this housing situation worse. So we have to check. We are still checking. We don't disagree with the Assembly. I've heard somebody's going to vote for this because they haven't got a pass to Broad Street. Sir, it's not a reason to have a vote of censure. Oh, if I misheard,
let's not have an exchange across the.
Sorry, sir. If I misheard, but what I'm saying, sir, I'm trying to get across that the vote of censure, and I'm very grateful to Deputy Higgins, who's been in this Assembly nearly as long as me, that it isn't just a slap across the wrist. Even in the proposition, the senator acknowledges that it's the Council of Ministers that you'll be censuring, the Assembly will be censuring. So half of us wouldn't, have anything to do with writing this report. But we do sit around the council and we do try and make sure that everything is on time. Things have got beyond us. But then again, sometimes when I see propositions lodged by backbenchers and they give us 4 weeks, they think everything else has got to go away. It can't happen like that. We are where we are, sir. To me, if you really believe that this council sits there and says, how can we get away with not implementing what this Assembly has asked us to do, vote for the vote of censure, sir. But there's nothing, we don't work like that. We want to respect, absolutely, this place is sovereign. I've been a backbencher a lot longer than I've been a minister. I'm telling all the newbies in here, after 22, when you step up, there is no buck stopping, sir. It comes to you. My officers don't tell me what to do. They say, Minister, what do you want to do? And you are there making absolutely massive decisions. And on housing, it's one of the most important decisions. This report had to be right. It has to take things into consideration. And if it was slightly late, and it was never this intention to be dragged, kicking and screaming to implement the Assembly's wishes. Sir, vote or no censure, don't vote for it. It's far too much for a narrow thing that we haven't done. Look at the wording, vote and stick to the vote of censure if you want to vote and think we hold you in contempt or this Assembly in contempt. But if you don't believe we hold this Assembly in contempt, sir, do not vote for it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputies. Any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Senator Balwa.
Yes, thank you, sir. And I'm just going to speak briefly, and it's following the Deputy Martin's speech just now. So what concerns me, and maybe this is a way to provide that critical friend piece of advice, when we're talking about timelines and deadlines and talking about capacity and ability to deliver on States Assembly decisions. And I think one of the issues we have here is that sometimes there are tactics that are played in order to get a proposition over the line or to not get a proposition over the line, or to just please in the best way possible, because the principle of what's being agreed is correct. But actually the capacity to deliver via an individual department in particular, it is not realistic. It's not realistic. And so you then lead to an inability to deliver on what that States Assembly have agreed. And I have read the report to the proposition, as Deputy Martin referred to, and it was the Council of Ministers that put the deadline in themselves. So I think there has to be a good, long, hard look in the mirror in terms of reflection about how organised and how realistic the Council of Ministers are about their priorities, but also the ability to deliver on those priorities. And I hear what the Housing Minister was saying. It's an extremely difficult role with limited power at all in terms of ability under that. And he has to rely very much on other ministers. Without that role of collective responsibility or having a party system and the discipline that comes with that, if it was a party system that was in place under the Council of Ministers. But sir, it does concern me, and it rings true to me what Deputy Morrell was referring to. And I do feel concerned that when I hear the same excuses or the same attempt to make an argument that we will do better, I'm not actually hearing what the solution is here. And that's why, from listening to the speeches that have been made so far, that piece of advice, that discussion around being realistic with deadlines, and enabling an understanding about the commitments that are being made and the pressure that the public sector are under to deliver, is extremely important in the debates we have, so that we can manage expectations and ensure that there is action taken at the end of a debate and a discussion around policies that are extremely important, not just to us, but to the island as a whole. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator. Deputy Tadier. Deputy Tadier.
Hello, thank you. So I had to speak when I heard Deputy Martin's speech. First of all, I wasn't going to speak initially because I thought the Constable of St Martin summed it up quite well. And the way I understood it is when she was referring to not having a pass to Broad Street, I think that was in reference to Deputy Guida's speech yesterday when he said the public doesn't see any difference between government and the Assembly. And I thought, what on earth has that got to do with this debate? Because it's trying to say that actually, look guys, we're all in this together, and as far as the public are concerned, we're all the ones that make decisions. So let's not be fighting amongst each other, and let's just get on with it. But of course, that's not the reality. There are backbenchers in this Assembly, there are scrutineers, and there is government, and there is a form of collective responsibility within government, and that's why this censure is being brought in government, because government has failed to do something that this Assembly has asked them to do. It's not about not doing something that Senator Mezek wants, it's about something that this Assembly has clearly asked for the Council of Ministers to do. And Senator Mezek, and I think none of us enter this debate lightly, and he didn't bring this proposition lightly. He recognises in his proposition in the report that actually he gave the Council of Ministers several chances to come back. There was an original deadline in April that they failed to meet. There was another deadline later on which they failed to meet, and now we find ourselves in September, and this has dragged on, and it is around the critical issue of housing, which I think we all recognise deep down there is a housing crisis in Jersey, and even though I don't think the proposition was successful, I'm sure I've heard the Chief Minister after that point say that, acknowledge publicly that there's a housing crisis. And this is fundamentally about how we hold any government to account, and how any Assembly holds any government to account when they don't deliver on the promises that they've made. And of course, there were several opportunities for the government to come back and say, actually, Senator Mezek, actually, Assembly, this is we are working on this, but we can't deliver this in the time frame that you wish for. So therefore, please give us a bit more time, but we are all working towards the same goal. That didn't happen. And Deputy Martin tried to overplay what a censure is. Yes, a censure is serious. It's an expression of disapproval from the Assembly towards a member, or in this case, the Council of Ministers. And it's absolutely appropriate that when the Assembly's wishes have repeatedly been ignored and they haven't delivered in a way which we, and indeed the public, would expect, that they should be censured. I'm not going to try and make you can compare it, if you like, to a caution, if you like. You go to a parish hall inquiry, you jump a red light, whatever it is. And there's no point in saying, well, I didn't intend to jump the red light. I was driving carefully and the red light just changed as I was going through it. You accept that you haven't complied with the regulations or the or your duty, and the centennier says to you, will you accept a caution? And if you're sensible and you're humble, you say, yes, I did make a mistake and I accept that caution, because there are other options available. Senator Mezek could have brought a vote of no confidence had he wanted to, and he could have raised this in other ways, and he didn't do that. And I think a censure is exactly what it says on the tin. It's about setting a line in the sand about what we expect of our government, that there is clear demarcation. Not all of us do or want to sit around the big table in Broad Street, but when we want to get things done for our parishioners, for our commanders more generally, we expect them to be delivered in a timely way by the civil servants and the ministers in that Broad Street building, wherever they might be. And we want that to work efficiently. This isn't about personalities or about parties or anything like that. This is about any government delivering properly and effectively. And when they don't do that, there should be consequences. And that's the point. If we don't, in our own personal lives and in our professional lives, there are consequences if you don't meet deadlines, if you don't deliver on your promises. And sometimes they can be soft consequences, sometimes they can be more severe. In parliamentary terms, for parliamentarians, there are political consequences, and this is one of the consequences, which is entirely proportionate and appropriate. when governments fail to deliver. And so I don't think we should be taken in by saying, oh, you know, it's been a difficult period and we've tried to do what we can and this is too severe. It's a consequence of a failure to deliver. The Council of Ministers, I think, should have the humility to accept that for what it is, accept the censure and move on.
Thank you very much, Deputy Senator Farnham.
Thank you, sir. And I believe every single member of this assembly, sir, takes a responsibility as a states member first and foremost and above every other position with which they're appointed to by the assembly. And I think that is absolutely right. And it certainly represents itself in Council of Ministers meetings, and when I work with my colleagues, even my assistant ministers. And I was prompted to follow the speech of Deputy Morell because he knows the way we work consensually in our department, and there is a very strong will to deliver for the Assembly. We are appointed by the Assembly and we report ultimately to the Assembly. And I have never witnessed anything other than a strong will by the Council of Ministers to deliver. And it's fair to say we don't always deliver. Sometimes we do drop the ball. Sometimes we can't meet the guarantees, but I don't think there's been any time in the last 18 months, never been a time throughout the pandemic when we could give an absolute guarantee, although as Council of Ministers and departments, we have tried. I'm not trying to make an excuse for this because we, in circumstances and instances like this, we have to do better. As Deputy Truscott said, this is a shot across the bow, and we can feel that. I don't think. I mean, a vote of censure for a government is not a simple slap on the wrist. It's a bit more than that. But I just wanted to try and reassure members, certainly from all the experience I've had working with ministers, there has never been any attempt not to deliver for the Assembly. It's not ever done purposefully. Of course, we all engage in political debate. We don't always agree. We have good debates. We have good debates around the Council of Ministers table. Senator Mesic knows that. He was there with us. He participated in some of those very good debates, and I haven't seen any. And the senator himself, was his position on housing is very, very well known. He's passionately champions the cause, but so does the new housing minister, and so does the Council of Ministers, and we all want to deliver. We will move heaven and earth, all of us, if we could, to make sure we find a solution for what I believe is the biggest single problem this island is facing moving ahead, and that is the challenges around housing. So if we have let the Assembly down, I'm sure I would like to apologise sincerely, and I know other ministers don't like to let the Assembly down. But what I will say is, rather than look to seek retribution through votes of censure, we can learn from these experiences. Like I said, there certainly was no intention or no intent to delay this. And what I will say in these times, these very challenging times that we've had with the pandemic, with Brexit, and the unique, very challenging political problems that we face, is that in my 20 years as a states member, without exception, we as an assembly, as a government, are always stronger, we're always more productive, and we're certainly more effective when we work together, sir. So let's work together to achieve the results that we need to get over this problem. Thank you.
Right, Senator. Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? If no other member wishes to speak, then I close the debate, other than to invite the Chief Minister to respond as he is entitled to do.
Sorry, sir. I was just trying to get my speech in the right place. So, let's be really, really clear. We apologise. We have apologised for the failure to meet the date. And we've also listened to the comments from members during this debate, which overall has actually been a fairly, well, good-natured debate. And so, just with the joys of IT, there we go. My computer is now frozen. What I would just make one clarification, and I know Deputy Martin is very passionate in her speeches, is that I think she spoke very, very warm words, but I just want to make one clarification that a vote, in my opinion, that a vote of censure is very different to vote no confidence. It is very, very important, obviously, but it is of a different level of magnitude. Now, sir, there are practical reasons why Part B was delayed. I don't need to go into those, I don't think, at this stage. It's not a matter we've taken lightly. And indeed, this is not about something that is not going to happen. It is about something that has been delayed, and it is going to happen this month. And what I'd like to just address a couple of comments from members, Deputy of St Mary, and also actually, for want of a better expression, put them together, Deputy Tadeo. Just to really emphasise the point, we did report on the 7th of June in R100, and we did signal the delay. As I understand it, members were also given a high-level briefing on the 19th of May. So Deputy Tadeo has suggested we did not come back to the Assembly. We should have done. We should have given members warning. Actually, if members look at R100, it does lay out the point that P165 was meant to be reported by the 30th of April. It lays out the various steps that have taken place. It does reference the briefing that took place on the 19th, but it also clarifies, and I think it puts it into juxtaposition actually. The reason I believe that April was selected was because the application was due to be made in May 2021. What the document says is that SOJDC are planning a final public consultation on their development plans in mid-July 2021, with the application being targeted to be submitted by the end of September 2021. I would update that. We're now expecting that to be October. And whilst the issuance of guidance has been delayed due to the change in timescales above, so we are being very clear, the Council Ministers remains committed to the publication of the guidance in the formal report to the States Assembly in advance of SOJDC's submission of the application. And that is where we presently still are, sir. Now, that may not be enough for members, let's be clear. So let's also look at the positives, if you like, if members like, for moving forward. And I am very grateful, sir, and I think actually it's an indicative of a different style of approach, because it's actually trying to do a long-term solution to the issue rather than short-term ones. And that is to the chair of PPC, who has confirmed that there is work taking place to produce a decision tracker for states' decisions. And I think, as we've said, sir, this has been going on a long time. That doesn't make it right. I'll make some comments about the Conotop St John's, but actually I agree with him. And I can go back, actually, Deputy Russell Labby, I think, brought a decision to this Assembly, which the Assembly backed, which was about not building on, I can't remember if it was green space or important open space in St Helier. Very clear decision of the Assembly back in 2015. Oddly enough, that decision was completely ignored. It wasn't a case it was delayed. It never happened. In fact, went completely against the decision of the Assembly. So there have been, this not, and other measures that we know that we are still sometimes trying to address. So what we have going forward, and actually we started this quite some time ago, we have firstly created a tracker for both scrutiny and PAC recommendations. And that's now what is evolving into tracking states' decisions. So in 2019, a tracker system was developed to enable reporting of the PAC on actions taken in respect to reports and recommendations by both the PAC and the CNAG. And obviously, officials have worked to review, bring all the recommendations in, categorise them, and then put some controls in place to validate some of the recommendations to ensure action is being delivered in the way they should be. That tracker has recently been updated to make it easier to monitor, etc. And scrutiny recommendations have now been added to that tracker system and are going to be monitored in the same way. Now where we are, as the chair of PPC has said, we are now in a position where States Assembly decisions can be put in play to ensure that where the Assembly approves an action for a minister or for COM or for SEB to take place, that will then be monitored. And the initial decisions for 2021 will be added to the new system by the end of October, and then all decisions moving forward. And then actually, sir, the intention is there'll be a progress report that comes to COM initially on a monthly basis, then going to quarterly, to get that process embedded. And sir, just to be clear, certainly I'm informed, I think this will be an officer level, that has been reported to the PAC in the past, that we did intend to do this process for States Assembly decisions once we had embedded PAC and CAG recommendations sufficiently. So this isn't something we've just pulled out the rabbit hole in the last month because of the vote of censure. But it is something that I'll be very frank. I share the Common St John's views, because he said he would have expected something to have long been in place. And I think that's the point. I was quite surprised when I came in that there wasn't a system. But that actually illustrates the changes in culture, silo mentality, defects in systems, or sorry, lack of systems, that we have been tackling. And like many things that one might expect, it was not there. There are no systems in place for a whole range of areas. For example, the reports on consultants that gets produced at the moment is a manual process. It takes something like 300 hours for an officer to go through and produce that 10, 15-page report. That is the poor state of the systems we have. We do not have the data or system in place that one might expect in the 21st century, and that is why we've put a lot of investment into these type of areas. And actually, if members recall, we did a warts and all presentation, I think back in 2019, and I will call them out because I'm still absolutely staggered and highly flattered almost. I think it was definitely Higgins stood up at the back of that presentation at the end of it and said that was the best presentation he'd ever attended, because essentially it was warts and all. It told members what it was like. And that is what we've been doing to try and get things into a better place. But it does take time. And boy, has a pandemic sucked resource out of addressing that. But, and as we said, we absolutely acknowledge we're not in the right place. Surely, well, that's up to members, but I hope it's also acknowledged that progress has been made. So this saga, as I said, has gone too long, and I referred to Deputy Lavey, I think that was back in 2015. But there are things that are being put in place to address these issues and ultimately to ensure the decisions of this Assembly are tracked, monitored, and most importantly, are actioned. So a vote of censure is an important matter. We have apologised for the delay in implementing Part B, but as I've said, in censuring the entire Council of Ministers, the proposition, not the speech of Senator Menzies, but the proposition and what this Assembly is being asked to vote on is also censuring us for things that we have done, in particular Part A, which for me is actually tied into an election commitment I made at the time. That is a matter for this Assembly. I make the point again, we are still in a pandemic and we are still diverting many resources into protecting this island and islanders. In our view, it's not a proportionate response given the circumstances. However, we've obviously taken members' comments on board, but I do ask members not to vote for this proposition. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Senator Menzies.
Thank you, sir, and I thank members who've taken part in this debate, and there's been a substantial proportion of the debate taken up by talking about the issue of housing and members reiterating how important that is. And I guess that's a good thing, because I think members should get used to talking about housing issues in this Assembly, because they're not going away anytime soon, and other issues to do with housing will consistently be brought back to this Assembly. However, this debate was actually the wrong time for it. Those parts of those contributions were actually irrelevant, because this itself is not a debate about housing. It's a debate on the Council of Ministers' failure to implement a very clear state's decision. And that could have been in relation to any other decision that hasn't been implemented. We could equally have a debate on that. It's not a debate about housing. And so if I were a minister, I too would probably have wanted to have used this debate to talk about housing, because it's a great distraction from the clear facts about what the proposition is really about. And let's reiterate those facts and make them crystal clear. On the 10th of February, this Assembly adopted a proposition requesting the Council of Ministers to do something, and the Council of Ministers didn't do it. That's the simple, clear fact for which there is no getting around. And the government can come forward with reasons for why it didn't do what the Assembly told it to do. And many of those reasons we may consider to be justifiable. We may think that there's some logic behind that, and we may want to give them some leeway on it. But the next fact, sir, is that the government did not adequately explain itself or allow it to be held to account on its failure to do what the Assembly had very, very clearly told it to do. When it missed the deadline that the Assembly had given it, it did not proactively explain why it had missed that deadline until I pushed for it. They then gave another deadline, and when they missed that deadline, they didn't account for it in this Assembly. And when I pushed for them to explain, I was ignored. And this goes to a point that the Constable of St John made in his speech yesterday, where he specifically asked me if in my summing up I would explain what I did to speak to the government to try and follow this up. I did what I could and I was ignored. What more can you do when you try to do the right thing? You've had a victory fair and square, and a victory we can all share in because it was a good proposition that was adopted. And when you see it falling apart because it's not being implemented, and you try to do the right thing and say, come on, what's going on? Can we talk about this? And you're ignored. What else do you have left at your disposal there? And the answer to that, sir, is a vote of censure. That is a way that this Assembly can formally say to whoever that censure is aimed at, we admonish you for this particular reason, and we want that on record. And contrary to what Deputy Martin said, it is not a vote of no confidence. It is, she was simply constitutionally wrong when she said that. And I said in my opening speech, I didn't want to make this a confidence, a vote of confidence issue, because it clearly doesn't meet that threshold, and it would cause more disruption than is worth it, when hopefully a censure motion would get things back on track. And to be honest, sir, in a way, they kind of already have helped get it back on track, because where the government failed to do what the Assembly told it to do, and then failed to account for why it hadn't done what the Assembly had told it to do, when I put this vote of censure on the record, when I lodged it, two things happened after that. First of those is that P69, the proposition in relation to South Hill, which was similar to the waterfront proposition and which too set a deadline, that was met. They did meet that deadline, and the Treasury Minister extolled that in her speech, saying that the government did show a commitment to respecting the sovereignty of the Assembly because it delivered on P69. Well, sir, this vote of censure was on the record at that point, so I wonder if that had anything to do with making them a little bit more enthusiastic about respecting the state's decision on that occasion, just in case a second vote of censure had been on the way. And several ministers, Senator Gorst and Senator Farnham, were both very clear in their apologies in their speeches, and the Chief Minister, of course, gave his own version of an apology in his speech. But I make the point again, sir, that that was not proactive. That has come about because this vote of censure was put on the table, and it was published in their comments last thing on Friday, just a few days before this debate took place, when actually, if it had come in May with some sort of presentation to the Assembly in the form of a statement from the minister or something like that to say, look, we underestimated this job and the States Assembly has inadvertently tied our hands behind our back and made it impractical for us to do what the Assembly actually wants us to do. Here's what we suggest instead. then this issue would never have got this far. And the government needs to learn that lesson. It isn't right for the Assembly to make a very, very clear decision, for the government to not abide by that decision and not proactively approach the Assembly to account for that. And the only reason there has been some form of accounting for that is because I have pestered them. And when my pestering wasn't working because they were ignoring me, I then have to go ahead with this vote of censure, which I said in my opening speech was not how I want to be spending my time and not how any of us wanted to be spending our time. And the one comment that I do want to address that came from the Treasury Minister in her speech, and I actually went to listen back to it last night to make sure that I got the wording absolutely right, because I was staggered when she said this. She said, and she was referring to me, she said, "The Senator, I'm afraid, greatly underestimates the complexity of issuing guidance on what is ultimately a 1.3 billion pound development." No, sir, I didn't pick the end of April deadline. That was not my idea. In fact, if members want to check the original proposition, I actually didn't set any deadline whatsoever. The end of April deadline came about because of a really good and constructive discussion that I had with the Treasury Minister and her team, where we met to discuss it. And I said, I'm prepared to compromise on some of what I'm asking for if you can propose good alternatives. And that's exactly what they did, to their credit. It was a really good discussion, and we came up with a form of words. The Minister lodged her amendment, and I supported it without any caveats, and I helped them actually put some of the wording together for it. But the deadline for the end of April was not my insertion. It was theirs. They were the ones who put that deadline there. And if that deadline greatly underestimated the complexity of the issue, it is not fair to put that on me, because I didn't come up with it. It was the government that came up with it, and they should show the respect to the Assembly by saying, we're sorry we put something unrealistic before you. And had they done that, we wouldn't have ended up in this situation. So, sir, I do really think that this is a very clear-cut matter. The facts are, as I have said, they are, and there hasn't been a credible argument against those facts, and there can't be, because they are simply facts. We told the government to do something, they didn't do it, and they didn't then allow themselves to be held to account for it. And that has been recognised by some members in their contributions in this debate, and that there were some contributions I was particularly pleased for. Deputy Morels was obviously one of those. Deputy of St Mary yesterday spoke well as well. Oh, and of course, Deputy of St Martin today. I agreed entirely with sorry, the Constable of St Martin. I completely agreed with what she said today. But there were two that I found very frustrating, though, because they spoke to say they had a lot of sympathy with what I was proposing, and they, I think, accepted the underlining facts and the principles here, but indicated that they may be voting against this vote of censure. And so I want to try to win them over at this last moment. And I am talking about the Constable of St John and Deputy Truscott. And again, I listened back to the Constable of St John's speech yesterday to make sure I got the wording right for what he said. He said, I hope they don't take a vote against this as an opportunity to ride roughshod over the Assembly. And I have to tell him that that's exactly what's going to happen if he and a majority of members do vote against this, because when it comes to the voting record, there is pour and there's contre. All of the nuance you use to arrive at your particular position does not show up on that record. If you say you are sympathetic to what the proposition stands for, but you're going to vote against it, on the record, you are in the same place as those who are not sympathetic to the proposition. You come up on the voting record exactly the same as those people, and that can be used to say that the Assembly did not agree with the principles underpinning this proposition, and that is what the Assembly will be marking. And to Deputy Truscott, who said that I believe I heard him say that he was inclined to vote against this, but that he hopes that the contributions in the debate should be seen as a warning to the government. And I ask, a warning of what? a warning that you can not do what the Assembly tells you to, and the Assembly will do nothing about it. I mean, some warning. The least the Assembly can do is support a motion of censure against them, which has no direct consequences. It's not, sorry, there's an echo.
There is.
It's not taking anyone out of office. It's not demanding a particular course of action. It is merely saying that we are officially unhappy with what you have done. And with that information, we will be expecting you to do better. And of course, if there were multiple votes of censure, that would have a cumulative effect, and eventually you get to the position of a vote of no confidence. But that's why it exists. It exists to be a stop before then, to give the government an opportunity to learn its lessons and to improve its conduct, so we don't end up here in future. So, sir, it's great to hear the apologies at this stage, but they came in a set of comments that missed their own deadline, that were presented as late as they possibly could have been, when a better opportunity would have been early on in this to just hold your hands up, own up and say, actually, we messed this up a little bit. We set a deadline that turned out not to be right, and we've not maintained decent communications on this. And since housing is such an important issue, and since so many members want to make that point, and I welcome that, then to expect the government to do better on its implementation of good housing policies in future. This was a good proposition, ultimately. It was one that all members of this Assembly, bar one, supported, so presumably one that we all buy into. Then we can expect the government to treat it seriously and can expect it to abide by its word and implement it fairly. And if problems arise, since we're all, bar one member who didn't vote for it, since we're all on one side here, then we can be reasonable about it. And if the government wants to come forward and very clearly say, this wording actually, it turned out, didn't work so well, so here's an alternative, can we all get behind that, please? What do you think? Rather than in a footnote somewhere in some written question or something that was only published because they were compelled to by the rules of this Assembly when I made them do so, then that would have shown a better approach. And so, sir, in closing, I just want to ask members that question: are states' decisions optional? Because if they are optional, then this body is not really doing its job effectively. And it is our job to hold the government to account and to make sure that they uphold the commitments that we extract from them as the sovereign decision-making body of the island. And if we don't want to take minor opportunities, which is what a vote of censure ultimately is, because nobody loses out on anything at the end of it, then we are sending a message ultimately that the government can just get on and do what it wants and doesn't have to treat those decisions with respect. And that's what this proposition is ultimately about. It is about respect and doing things properly, irrespective of what the subject matter ultimately is. So, sir, I ask members to vote in support of this motion of censure, to say to the government to exert ourselves as the sovereign decision-making body of the island, and say when we make decisions, we expect them to be upheld. And where they can't be upheld for legitimate reasons, you must come back to us and account for yourselves there. And we will approach that in a reasonable way if you approach it in a reasonable way as well. And since that is reasonable, why is this proposition not reasonable? I ask members to vote in support of this motion of censure so we can get on with more important things. And I call for the appel, please, sir.
That is called for. And I ask the greffier to open the voting. Vote is on P 72. Senator Pallett, would you like to indicate your vote orally, because you can't vote on the screen, I don't think, because your seat is different.
So I think
you vote on the screen.
So
sorry, you told me that. but the Conotop St Clement can't, of course, because he's not. Right, sorry, Senator Barrett, I'm entirely mistaken. You're perfectly capable of voting on the screen in the normal way, and I apologise.
I should have just explained. I'm struggling with the fans. I've got an eye problem, so that's why.
No, that's absolutely fine. I fully understand why you've moved, and that's perfectly acceptable. However, Conotop St Clement, you don't have the luxury of voting over a screen, so you'll need to indicate your vote at this point.
So I'm getting some technical troubles on my screen. So I wondered if I may just lodge my vote.
I can't hear.
Oh.
It's true.
So I think I've had a bit of a technical picture, but I think I voted online. Or
My issue appears to resolve itself.
Thank you. Right. Well, so far we've recorded 40 votes, so it's likely that the voting system is working. I note 2 votes in the chat on the assumption that those who are voting in the chat have not been able to record their vote. Very well. Does anyone else come into the assembly without a machine to vote on? Right. It's coming much faster than I'd hoped. Yes. If members have had the opportunity of casting their vote.
So I just wanted to make sure my vote was recorded as contra because it wasn't clear on the screen. Thank you.
Well, we'll have to wait and see, because we obviously can't vote twice, but we note that you're intending to vote contra, and I ask the greffier, therefore, if members have had the opportunity to vote, I ask the greffier to close the voting. The proposition has been defeated. 20 votes pour, 22 votes contra in the link, and a further vote, 3 votes contra in the chat, and 1 vote pour and 2 votes contra in the indicated within the assembly.
So can we have them read out both ways?
Yes.
Yes.
So those members who voted pour using the system: Deputy Pamplin, Senator Valois, Deputy Alves, the Constable of St John, Constable of Grouville, Deputy IA, Constable of St Martin, Deputy Lahegre, Deputy of St Martin, Deputy of St Mary, Deputy of St John, Deputy Southern, Deputy Morel, Deputy Tadier, Deputy Ward, Senator Moore, Deputy Doublé, Senator Mezek, Senator Pallett, and Deputy Gardner. Those members who voted contra on the system: Deputy Labby, Constable of St Helier, Deputy Lewis, Deputy Pinnell, Deputy Wickenden, Deputy Truscott, Senator Lafondre, the Constable of St Peter, Deputy Higgins, Deputy of Grouville, Deputy Guida, Deputy Martin, the Constable of St Juan, Deputy Ash, Constable of St Lawrence, Senator Gorst, the Deputy of Trinity, Senator Farnham, Deputy of St Peter, Deputy Young, the Constable of St Brelard, and the Constable of Trinity. In the chat, we had votes contra from Deputy Masson, the Constable of St Mary, and the Deputy of St Juan, and the other votes have already been read out to the Assembly.
Very well. The next item of public business is the draft Civil Aviation Amendment Jersey Law P64, lodged by the Minister for External Relations and Financial Services. The main respondent for this debate will be the Chair of the Economic and International Affairs Scrutiny Panel, Deputy St Mary, and I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Civil Aviation Amendment Jersey Law 2000, a law to amend the Civil Aviation Jersey Law 2008 and the Air Navigation Jersey Law 2014, and for connected purposes. The state, subject to the sanction of Her Most Excellent Majesty and Council, have adopted the following law.
Minister.
Sir, the Minister has delegated this to me, and unfortunately he's not in the Assembly anymore, so.
So very well. Assistant Minister, yes.
I'm also having a few sound problems because I switch my PC on, it echoes, so I'll try and use the microphone.
Or don't
After
don't
that.
turn it on. Just-
So this draft amendment law would, if passed by the Assembly, amend the civil.
Yes.
I think you can't use the microphone, Qanitab, on the computer. You need to use the microphone that's lit up, but you need to angle it closer to your mouth so that it.
Thank you, sir. Yes.
Thank you.
Right, so I will, for the benefit of members, start again, in case they haven't been able to hear me, and I apologise. So this draft amendment law would, if passed by the Assembly, amend the Civil Aviation Jersey Law 2008 to introduce regulation-making powers to provide for the implementation of the new air accident and investigation legislation. The investigation of air accidents and incidents is currently provided for through the Civil Aviation Investigation of Air Accidents and Incidents Jersey Order 2000. This legislation needs to be updated to reflect the developments in international standards in this area, as set out in the Convention on Civil Aviation, the Chicago Convention. I should clarify that the draft amendment does not of itself bring the Civil Aviation Jersey Law into line with the standards set out in Annex 13 of the Chicago Convention. It instead introduces regulation-making power that will enable regulations to be made by the Assembly to this effect. So rather than updating the 2000 order by order in Council, I intend to bring forward draft regulations under the 2008 law to implement Annex 13 of the Chicago Convention, which relates to the investigation of air accidents and incidents. These regulations would replace the 2000 order, and so this draft amendment law, which also provides for that order, would cease to have effect. The amendment law and draft regulations therefore will be brought into force simultaneously by ministerial order. The draft amendment law would also amend existing regulation-making powers contained in the law, so that it is possible for the Assembly to introduce regulations implementing international agreements, instruments, or obligations relating to civil aviation. The existing powers provide only for the Assembly to implement such regulations, instruments, or obligations by making regulations to amend the law. These new and expanded regulation-making powers will allow the island to keep pace more quickly and easily with changes to international standards in civil aviation. So, for the avoidance of doubt, the above refers both to the new regulation-making powers introduced by Article 19A and the expansion of existing regulation-making powers in Article 21. In addition, the draft amendment law makes two changes to the Air Navigation Jersey Law 2014. It clarifies the wording used in the provision prohibiting aircrew from being drunk or under the influence of drugs. It also defines the term psychoactive substances, using the same definition as that is used by the International Civil Aviation Authority. So I therefore commend this legislation to the Assembly and open the debate.
So you are the principles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the principles? No member wishes to speak on the principles. Then I ask the greffier to put a voting link into the chat, and the debate is closed. The link is now in the chat. Ask the greffier to open the voting, and I ask members to vote in the normal way. Qanitab St Clement, how do you vote? Qanitab?
So can I record my vote as poor as well, because the link doesn't appear to appear?
Yes, very well.
Sir, I'm having problems getting in on the link or on the chat. Could I have my vote recorded as poor, please?
Yes, indeed, Qanitab. Well, I've got 32. There's another 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 6 in the chat and another 4 here. So that's probably not. Yeah. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. The principles have been adopted. 32 votes pour, no votes contrary, no abstentions within the link. A further 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 votes pour noted in the chat, and a further 4 votes pour noted over the within the assembly or the disembodied voice of the Connétable St Mary. So the principles have been adopted. Does the Economic and International Affairs Scrutiny Panel wish to scrutinise the matter?
No, thanks, sir. We did seek clarification on a number of points previously. We have been given that clarification, so no, we do not, sir.
Thank you very much. How do you wish to propose the articles in second reading then?
En bloc, please, sir.
And, are they seconded en bloc?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the articles in second reading? No member wishes to speak on the articles in second reading? Then I close the debate and ask the greffier to place a voting link into the chat. The link is there. I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to cast their votes in the normal way, on the assumption that some members have the same difficulty. Monsieur Pour.
Can I record mine as poor, please, sir?
Yes, indeed. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. The articles have been adopted in second reading. 37 votes pour, no votes contre, no abstentions within the link. 4 votes pour in the chat and 1 vote contre, and a further 3 votes noted pour within the assembly. Very well. How do you wish to deal with the matter in third reading?
Yes, I'd like to propose it in third reading, please, sir. But before I do, I'd just like to thank members for their support to date, and also thank the scrutiny panel for their engagement and support, which has been very useful as always.
Thank you very much, Connétable.
Sir, before we go to the vote, could I ask if we can know who the contra vote came from, please, sir?
Well, the contra vote is in the chat. It was from Senator Ferguson.
Thank you.
Very well. Is the law seconded for third reading? Does any member wish to speak in third reading? No member wishes to speak in third reading. Then I close the debate and ask the greffier to post a link into the chat in the normal way. And I ask the greffier to open the voting and members to cast their votes. Pour. Connétable St Clement. Are you able to vote in the link?
Thank you, sir, but it has worked this time.
She said, I've already asked. Yes, she's voted for. Okay. Members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. The law has been adopted in third reading, 39 votes pour, no votes contre, no abstentions within the link, 3 votes pour noted in the chat, and 2 votes pour in addition noted within the assembly. Very well. The next item is Chief Executive Officer Recruitment Process P73, lodged by Deputy Morell. The main respondent for this debate is the Chair of the State's Employment Board, Chief Minister in effect, and I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The States are asked to decide whether they have opinion to request the State's Employment Board to halt the recruitment process for a new Chief Executive Officer, CEO, and instead to extend the current interim CEO's contract until a date after the elections in June 2022, pending the completion and publication of a review into the appointment process for the former CEO, as recommended by the Controller Auditor General and requested by the Public Accounts Committee.
Deputy Morell.
Thank you, sir. Do you mind if I stand too?
No, provided you can be heard over the, if you prefer to stand, that's within.
We shall find out. Thank you, sir. Well, I'll start by saying I appreciate that this proposition has caused a great deal of consternation in some areas, and I apologise for that. This proposition, and I'll start therefore by saying to people the reasons that I brought this proposition. So it's quite simple, and perhaps too simple. Sometimes think my reasoning can be too simple, sir. So I, over the past 3.5 years in this assembly, have seen the public service and have seen instability. We have seen reported poor culture in terms of leadership. I believe we have seen cronyism. We have seen a diminishment of the status of this assembly. And so we have seen a lack of understanding of Jersey. That's, in my view, summed up the situation up until the appointment of the interim CEO. And following that appointment, those conditions that I've just mentioned were replaced by stability, a respectable culture, an understanding of the role and status of the Assembly, and very, very importantly, an appreciation of Jersey's unique culture. So, sir, when I looked at that truly quite magnificent change, the main difference was the appointment of the interim CEO, and he is to be congratulated for that. And so, in my mind, I was looking at a vastly improved situation within the public service, and I was grateful for that. I couldn't help but think, this has come June, July time, hold on, this gentleman has had a 4 or 5 month long job interview, and he's proving to be extremely good. And I knew, because SEB had told us that they were undertaking a new recruitment process, I knew that there was a recruitment process going on. But of course, versus a 5 month long job interview, that recruitment process would involve, at best and at most, a 5-hour job interview to be undertaken via Zoom or some other technological means. And so it seemed to me, sir, given that the civil service was that and is this now and is in a much, much better place, why gamble with Jersey's future? Because there's no doubt when you appoint somebody new, you could be going to better places. But as we've seen in the past, you could also be going to places which aren't as good. In the last decade or so, sir, we've seen 3 compromise agreements. And so in my mind, and in those of many people in this island, states members, civil servants and islanders, it seems to me that the best way forward was to stick with the interim CEO because, and solely because, he appears to be doing such a good job. Why gamble when we're winning? We may win more with the new person, but we may lose. I know that many States members shared my concern that SEB had pressed ahead so quickly with the appointment process, particularly as it was doing so without having implemented the 6th recommendation, particularly of the CNAG's report entitled States Employment Board Follow-up Employment of the Former Chief Executive. That 6th recommendation asked SEB to undertake the proposed review of the original appointment process for the former CEO as soon as practicable and implement the findings from that review in the recruitment and appointment process for the new permanent chief executive. The CNAG's report also said that SEB had resolved at its meeting of the 24th of November that, and I quote, it resolved to request one member of the SEB and its independent HR advisor to undertake a review of those aspects. However, that review has not been commenced, and there is no reference to it in subsequent minutes of the SEB. The SEB has now commenced the recruitment process for a new permanent chief executive. If any lessons are to be learned, the CNAG said, from the previous appointment process, it is important for the review planned by SEB to take place as a matter of urgency. End quote. Of course, we know today that the recruitment process has all but been completed, and this review has still not taken place. The Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel's People and Culture Review raises several issues, some of which should have been resolved before the recruitment process took place. These include identification of a conflict of interest concerning the Chief Minister in his roles as line manager of the Chief Executive and Chair of the States Employment Board. The report asks for an independent review of the conflict of these roles. The report also identifies shortcomings in the job description for the new Chief Executive. It goes without saying that these shortcomings should have been resolved before moving to offer the role and agree a contract. The report also highlights the fact that within a few months of taking office, the new CEO will be serving a new government and quite possibly a new Chief Minister, with different aims and objectives to the existing government. The former CEO's own performance appraisal placed a focus on the importance of the relationship between the Chief Minister and the CEO. Common sense, in my view, dictates that given the success of the current interim CEO, SEB should have waited until after the election in 2022 before commencing their search for a new permanent CEO. Sir, these reports show us that against a background of compromise agreements, civil service instability, and a poor employment culture, SEB has chosen not to learn the lessons of the past and has instead pressed on with its recruitment process regardless. It is in the face of these facts that I drafted my proposition, a proposition that, to my mind, amounts to good common sense and doing the right thing for Jersey. As I said, why gamble with the island's future when we have reached a stable place? Now, it's important to understand that at the time of lodging, I did not know the identity of the preferred candidate as permanent CEO, and I made no effort to find it out, because this proposition has nothing to do with that person. To be honest, when I wrote this proposition, that person could have been anybody. The leading concept in this proposition, as I have said and I will repeat throughout the speech, is why gamble? As I've said, when we gamble, we can win more. Maybe this new CEO will be even better. But the flip side of any gamble is that you can lose it all. And it is that potential loss, because it is a loss for the island, not for any one of us in here or any group of us in here. If there is a loss, it is the island that will feel it. And this is what my proposition seeks to avoid. My view has always been that given the excellent performance of the current interim CEO, we should ask him to stay on until at least after the election, so we can provide the stability that we can provide the stability during the instability caused by the installation of a new government. These are unstable times. An election, whilst an exciting time, is an unstable time. And after the election, as this assembly changes, new people come in, we will then vote and install a government that will be different. It's impossible to say how. It could be vastly different, it may be marginally different, but it will be different. And that is a period of instability. I believe the CEO situation should have been a point of stability over that period of necessary instability. I think it may be found interesting by members of the Assembly, and if not by them surely by islanders, that at the time of lodging, I believe there was overwhelming support for this proposition. And indeed, I'm unsure that were it not for one particular piece of information, this proposition would likely succeed today. Sir, with that, I'll now pause to ask the Solicitor General a question. Would he advise the Assembly as to what he believes to be the legal ramifications and situation created by this proposition were it to succeed? With that, I'll ask the Solicitor General for his advice.
Are you able to advise the Assembly, Mr. Solicitor?
So yes, of course. The recruitment of a new Chief Executive Officer is governed by Article 26AA of the Employment of States of Jersey Employees Law 2005. That provision prescribes in law the process which must be followed, and I stress must be followed, when recruiting someone to the post of CEO. It's couched in mandatory language, sir. It requires the State's Employment Board to request the Jersey Appointments Commission to nominate a commissioner or commissioners for the purpose of the recruitment exercise. Those people have a number of statutory obligations they must fulfill. First, they must decide which candidates for recruitment shall be interviewed, and shall means the same as must, not maybe, but must, shall be interviewed. Which candidates following interview have met the required standard for recruitment, not may have met, but have met. And then this, which is perhaps most significant of all, which candidate is to be offered the post, not which candidate ought to be offered, or which candidate ought to be recommended to someone else for appointment to the post, but which candidate is to be offered the post. And so the language is clear. The legal statutory obligation and power to effectively select the next Chief Executive Officer sits with the commissioners appointed under Article 26AA. And one other thing it says is that the successful candidate is appointed on merit. That's the process prescribed by law, a law which the Assembly enacted, I think, in 2017. Tellingly, the law creates no power of veto over the Commissioner's appointment decision for anyone. It creates no power for anyone to review the appointment decision of the Commission, nor does it create any legal requirement on the Commissioners to consult anyone. That's not to say in an appropriate situation it wouldn't be appropriate for there to be consultation, simply that there is no legal requirement on the selection panel to do so. Once a successful candidate has been offered the post of CEO by the commissioners, then Article 26AA is silent about what happens next. But what I ask myself must happen next if the legal selection procedure under 26AA is not to be frustrated or rendered nugatory without effect. And what must follow, it seems to me, is this: the new CEO must take up his or her post. Yes, a contract of employment will have to be signed first, but that is a necessary step in giving effect to the selection decision made according to law under 26AA. The CEO must take up post. Otherwise, the SCB could simply ignore the selection made according to law and render 26AA without any effect whatsoever. This proposition, I'm bound to say, and it is the opinion of the law officers, if adopted and if acted upon by the State's Employment Board, would entail them calling an abrupt halt to a lawful and legally binding selection process prescribed by law. I think it would be fair to say, if colourfully, it would involve driving a coach and horses through the law. What might the legal consequences of SEB doing that on the back of this proposition be? Well, in my view, the least speculative option would be a challenge by way of judicial review in the Royal Court. That challenge would not be without its difficulties. It might be argued, for example, on behalf of SEB, they would be the ones being reviewed, that this was a private law matter and not susceptible to judicial review at all. On the other hand, it might be said by any challenger, which could be the successful candidate, but it could also be the Jersey Appointments Commission who would have locus to bring a review. They might say, well, no, this is a public law matter. The SEB is a public body. The office of CEO is a public office with substantial effects on the public generally, as I think Deputy Morell has just really explained. And plus, and perhaps significantly, the appointment process is prescribed by statute. And it might be said those are all the hallmarks of a public law decision which you can judicially review. If it were reviewed and reviewed successfully, that would entail the Royal Court concluding that the State's Employment Board had acted unlawfully or unreasonably or with procedural irregularity. If that were the case, what order might the Royal Court make? The most obvious would be a mandatory order. The Royal Court would order the SEB to get on and sign an employment contract with the successful candidate, which of course would be precisely the opposite effect to what this proposition, if adopted, would call upon SEB to do. Other options, suing for damages on the applicant's part or for discrimination, are in my view at this stage altogether more remote and uncertain. But erring on the side of caution, one would not rule them out, at least as a possibility in these circumstances. But my professional concern as a lawyer, I think in the first instance, would be the possibility of a challenge by way of judicial review. So there is, I think, a distinction to be drawn between, on the one hand, a political debate about the timing of the selection process, which is what I take this proposition to invite. And on the other hand, the effect in law of Article 26AA. Because in my view, no amount of political debate about timing, whether there should have been consultation or whether things recommended by various people should have been put in place beforehand, no amount of debate on those topics can now change or alter the legal nature of what has happened. Because as a matter of law, a successful candidate has been selected according to law. And this debate, it seems to me, cannot change that. Now, whether there is political merit or not in the points that Deputy Morell makes is not for me to comment on. What I can comment on as a lawyer is that whether or not there should have been consultation, whether or not various recommendations should or should not have been put into effect first, are not things which can alter the legality of the selection that has been made. Nor are they things which, in my view, if there were to be a challenge in court, they are not things which would be likely, I think, to persuade a court that SEB had acted lawfully in pulling the plug on the process on the back of this proposition. I think a court would still come to the view that SEB doing that was unlawful in all the circumstances. And so I think there is a stark divide, if I may say so, between a consideration of political matters and the state of the law and the legal state of the decision that has been made. So public authorities here and elsewhere can and do from time to time act unlawfully. That is an occupational hazard of public decision making. But such unlawful acts usually occur in good faith and through simple error of judgment or a misapplication of legal principle. Occasions where a public body knowingly and quite willfully decides to act unlawfully, as would, in my view, be the case here, ought to be vanishingly rare indeed, to the point of never happening. To act in such a way would, it seems to me, give rise to some genuine concern about good governance and the rule of law. And I think I will betray nothing of a confidential nature if I say no law officer could ever advise anyone to disobey the law. So if elected legislators do not care for the law, the remedy lies with them. They are able to repeal that law, they are able to amend that law, and they are able to pursue political avenues to express their displeasure at what may have happened. But what they ought not to do, in my view, is request someone else not to obey that law. So that's my advice, and I hope it's to some extent helpful.
Thank you, sir.
Deputy Pamplin has asked for a point of clarification. I think it might be useful to hear from the Solicitor General with the totality of his advice before you continue with your speech, Deputy Morell. So purely related to what the Solicitor General has said, Deputy Pamplin.
Thank you, sir. It was something that there was a lot the Solicitor General said there. It was really helpful, but earlier part of his speech, sir, the Solicitor General made reference to the commissioners seeking advice or opinion. And could you just clarify what he meant by that? Because I missed part of it and it didn't sound right to me. I hope that made sense.
I'm not sure I did say that, sir. If I did, I didn't mean to. The 26AA, I think, is what I may have been referring to. And that simply provides the legal process which the commissioners must go through to select a person who is to be the next chief executive officer. The law doesn't make any provision for them having to seek legal advice. The law does not make any provision for them having to consult any third party. The point I was making was the fact that the law doesn't require them to consult. There's no legal obligation to consult. Doesn't mean there might not be a pragmatic good reason to consult in any given case. It simply means that there is no legal duty on them to consult. I hope that clarifies.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Constable St John, you have a point of clarification for the Solicitor General?
Yes, please, sir. Can the Solicitor General confirm if the law states when the process starts following the position becoming vacant, or is that a decision purely for the State Employment Board?
The law doesn't provide any time frame by which the process must be begun. It's a matter, it seems to me, for the State's Employment Board.
And Deputy Young, do you have a point of clarification for the Solicitor General?
Yes, sir. The end conclusion of the Solicitor General's advice raised major issues for me. He pointed out the conflict between the legal position and this proposition, which would mean that if we were to vote for it, then there would be normally that situation would be one of the error, good faith and judgment. But what he said, I think, was that if we were to go ahead and vote this proposition, knowingly, willingly and knowingly an act against the law, what that raises for me in my mind is what, if people were to do that, what is the potential consequences of that? I know in the UK local authorities, if elected members were to do such things, there are serious consequences of that. So could he elaborate what that would effectively do? I think that's a really critical point. If members go ahead and willingly and knowingly make a decision to vote for this proposition and disobey the law, I'd like to know what he considers the consequences that potentially could be.
Could I ask, if I'm clarifying your question correctly in this way, to Young, are you asking the Solicitor General what the consequences would be for the Assembly if they voted for it, or what the consequences would be for the States Employment Board if they acceded to the request of the Assembly as a result of that positive vote. Which was your question?
Both of those things, sir, and you know, I think, you know, most members would not. I don't think that members would willingly want to get in the position where we deliberately disregard legal advice, sir, and I think that needs to know consequences.
Very well. That's as far as I think we can go in a point of clarification. Can you assist with that, Mr. Sister?
So yes, I don't think there would be any legal consequences for the Assembly voting for this proposition. The legal consequences would be for the States Employment Board if they were to accede to it. The most likely one would be, in my view, a challenge by way of judicial review.
Deputy Gardner, do you have a point of clarification for the Solicitor General?
Yes, thank you. There are recruitment processes that will not end with appointment from various reasons. As this proposition standing now, we are not opening the other recruitment process or will appoint somebody else. It's basically asking to stop recruitment process. Is it legal obligation from the appointed commissioner to finalize and appoint person, or if it's their power to hold without signing the contract?
That's a good question. I think that the States Employment Board would have, in an appropriate case, a discretion, but it would have to be their discretion. It would have to be their independently exercised discretion not to sign a contract of employment following a successful 26AA selection procedure, but in very limited circumstances. For example, where it transpired subsequently that the successful applicant had lied in the course of the application or had withheld material information, which would entitle the SEB and indeed the Appointments Commission to say that vitiated the 26AA procedure. But it would be in those extremely limited circumstances. The anticipation must be where a 26AA selection has been made, that the process by means of an employment contract will be completed within a reasonable time. That must be the expectation if the law is not simply to be, as I say, rendered nugatory. It seems to me tolerably clear that this proposition is suggesting a great deal more than just delaying for a short period. It has the hallmarks, as it were, of negating the selection process by kicking it into the long grass for many months indeed, in such a way that it would be quite clear to me, at least, that proceeding in that way would be unlawful. I don't know if that helps clarify, but that's my response.
Deputy Ward, do you have a question?
Thank you, sir. And I think part of what I was going to ask has just been answered. But I suppose to understand this is a process of recruitment. Does the law define the end point of that process? So is it the signing of the contract itself? Could it be determined as a verbal contract has been offered? Could it be that public knowledge in some way defines that there's been an end process there? Is that within the process itself? I think it's just an understanding of if there was a delay to the process which has ended, what is the end point of that process? Does that question make sense? And I completely understand if it doesn't.
No, it does make sense. The answer is, I think I explained earlier, that 26AA is silent as to what happens after the successful candidate has been offered the post. It seems to me that that if 26AA is to be of effect, the post must be taken up within a reasonable time. It must not be denied to the successful candidate for arbitrary reasons, one of which would be any of the reasons I'm bound to say, in my opinion, that appears in this proposition, because they are political reasons, and 26AA is about the independent selection of the next chief executive officer. One would therefore expect there to be the CEO would take up post within a reasonable time. A condition precedent to that might well be the signing of a written contract. And in most instances, and I've not been privy to the process, one would expect a very senior appointment of this sort, where the job is offered, to be expressed to be subject to contract. That may well be what happened here, but of course a contract can arise orally. It would be unlikely if such were the case here, I know not. But yes, a contract could arise orally. But the point at which the deal is done, so to speak, is the point at which contractual relationships arise, but you cannot divorce the contractual relationship from the 26AA process. Either 26AA means what it says, or it doesn't. And if it means what it says, it has to be followed. And the candidate who is offered the post pursuant to that process has to take up the post. And if for any, as I say, arbitrary or inappropriate reason that is frustrated, that would involve the SEB in unlawfulness.
Sorry, so just to thank you for that. It really helps. And the offer, the point of offer is something that could be wrangled, if that's the wrong word, about later if that offer was been seen to be withdrawn. So that's a verbal offer. I think it's that finality point of where the offer is made that I'm trying to understand.
The finality point would not be the offer, at least in terms of the candidate, because the candidate could say, well, thank you very much, I've changed my mind, I don't want the job after all. But where the offer is made and the candidate wishes to accept it, then the legal process, it seems to me, is binding, and that candidate must take up post.
You have a further question, Conor Tarbison, John?
Yes, please, sir. Can the Solicitor General confirm whether or not a signed heads of terms would be contractually binding?
I don't know immediately the answer to that. The way I think these things happen is that the job offer is made, usually it's expressed to be subject to a written contract. There are then heads of terms which set out the ambit of the contractual arrangement which are agreed. And then there is the contract of employment which follows upon those agreed heads of terms, which gives legal effect to and creates a binding agreement between employer and employee. That's how I think it happens here.
Very well. Do you wish to continue with your speech, Deputy Mayor?
So I asked the chat if I could ask a further question.
Yes, please do.
Sorry, thank you. So I apologise, Solicitor General, for putting you on the spot. Really, they are just clarifications. First of all, was which body owns the recruitment process? In my understanding, from what you said, SEB starts the recruitment process by asking the Appointments Commission to undertake it, but then the ownership of that process, the sole ownership of that process, is with the Appointments Commission. Am I correct?
Yes, I think that's correct, subject to the one caveat I made, which is that where subsequently something emerges that is really to the successful candidate's detriment, then SEB, in my view, would have a discretion to say, well, we're going to call time on this application. But the Deputy says is quite right. The SEB begin the process by requesting the Commission to appoint a recruitment panel. It's then for the recruitment panel entirely to own the selection process. It then goes back to SEB for the agreeing of the minute details of the employment contract.
Thank you. One last question, sir, which is, should my proposition succeed today, sir, Solicitor General, are you able to say, give us a sense of how you feel you would advise SEB in light of that? So.
I can only repeat what I've said already. I don't think it will surprise anyone if I say a law officer of the Crown could not advise someone to act unlawfully.
Thank you, sir. With that, if you don't mind, I'll resume.
No, please do resume your speech.
And I'd like to thank the Solicitor General for his help, sir. Sir, whilst utterly deferring to the Solicitor General and his legal knowledge, personally, I don't agree with all of that advice in my reading of the law, but that is irrelevant, sir. I know that the Solicitor General's words will cause the clear majority of States members to cool their support for this proposition. But he is saying But what I believe he is saying is that my proposition is asking for SEB to undertake something that is illegal. However, whilst I may disagree, because I do not see in the relevant law any suggestion that the Assembly cannot halt the recruitment process, which in my mind is something that is not politicisation, it is pragmatic. It is pragmatic realism, in fact, sir. But the Solicitor General's advice suggests otherwise, and I know the majority of States members will listen to it. This advice also raises, however, a much more significant issue, one that was pertinent to Senator Mezek's proposition of censure, and that issue is the primacy of this Assembly. We have a situation in which the SEB can not only ignore Comptroller and Auditor General's recommendations, but is also exempt from acting according to the will of this Assembly. Sir, this concerns me deeply and explains in large part the reason I voted for Senator Mezek's proposition. In fact, almost wholly, it is the sense of the powerlessness of this Assembly in an increasing number of areas. And if no other reason, I believe this proposition has done everyone a favour in highlighting that. I agree that recruitment processes should be fair and free from political influence in the selection of a candidate. But that does not mean the sovereign political body, that is this Assembly, should be rendered impotent in terms of choosing whether or not to start or stop a process of recruitment in any area of the civil service, but most particularly in terms of the Chief Executive. Perhaps if I believed that SEB and the Appointments Commission had overseen a fair and transparent recruitment processes during the time I've been in this Assembly, then maybe I would be grudgingly willing to accept the primacy of SEB in this matter. But sir, in my eyes, I have seen cronyism, the cronyism that I referred to at the beginning of this speech, as proof that the processes currently being used and overseen by the Appointments Commission are clearly insufficient. On top of this, we have all seen and all hear of the constant choosing of UK candidates over Jersey candidates, resulting in a situation whereby among the entire senior leadership of the civil service, and I'm referring there to Director Generals and above, there is, to my knowledge, not a single person born in Jersey serving in one of those positions. The consequence of this is that the culture of the government administration is divorced from the culture of this island. I also have evidence-based reasons to believe that the interview process used in the CEO recruitment had flaws. I will not go into those here, for it will be unfair and unwise. However, this evidence raises serious concerns in my mind about the conduct of the Appointments Commission. And I believe it is important that this Assembly stops ignoring the deficiencies exhibited by the bodies of the SEB and the JAC in terms of recruitment processes. But those issues, as much as I and others in this Assembly want them and want to get to the bottom of them, they are not the reason I brought this proposition. As I said previously, the reason I brought this proposition was to continue the stability and improved culture that this interim CEO has brought to the public service. Sorry, sir, I was worried a photograph was being taken there. Yeah, hold on. But it is clear that between the advice of the Solicitor General, the PR campaign that was undertaken by the government in the last few days, that I, and by extension this Assembly, have been put into a no-win situation with regard to my proposition. If in the extremely unlikely event that this proposition were to succeed, then either the State's Employment Board will pause the recruitment process and extend the current CEO's contract as the proposition requires, but by doing so, it would put the interim CEO into the position of working with a Chief Minister who doesn't believe he should have the role. And I don't mean that in terms of abilities, I just mean in terms of the processes that have been undertaken, and believe that we need to move on to the new CEO. That is something, sir, which is not good for Jersey and could lead to unintended dysfunction within the civil service, thereby creating the possibility that the next 9 months of recovery from COVID could become wasted. Alternatively, the SEB could ignore the will of the Assembly and continue with the appointment process, and is likely to be advised to do that. In which case, despite succeeding, this proposition will still have lost. Some might say, well, if SEB ignores the will of the Assembly, then a vote of confidence should be brought against it. Now, some may believe SAB may well be worthy of a vote of confidence, but I have to say that when torn between the Assembly and acting illegally, SEB will be in an impossible position. And so such an action in this very limited case would certainly not be appropriate. Sir, sometimes you have to know when the cause is lost. And in the case of this proposition, that, I believe, is firmly the case. Not just in terms of the number of votes, which I believe, following the advice of the Solicitor General, would be impossible to achieve, but also in terms of the consequences of those votes, particularly if this proposition were to succeed. In this situation, I have to ask myself, what is the right thing to do for Jersey? Sadly, and with great regret, given the analysis above that I have laid out, to continue with this proposition would certainly be going against what is best for Jersey, and indeed could harm the island, harm this government, and harm this Assembly, and harm SEB. Do I think SEB has acted entirely in the interest of the island by continuing with this process, by starting the process so soon? No, I don't. By starting the process in advance of undertaking the CNAG's recommendations, certainly not. I also have to have regard to the two individuals now involved in the role of CEO. I have to be aware that the ensuing debate could cause them harm, and knowing that my cause is lost, whichever way the result goes, I cannot, in all good faith, subject those two individuals to the chance that their reputations are harmed in any way. Sir, I know that many States members have deep concerns about the States Employment Board, the Jersey Appointments Commission, and the recruitment process, not just for the CEO, but across the organisation. With that in mind, I have asked the Chief Minister, as Chair of SEB, to agree to hold a question session with all States members, that is a question session between SEB and States members, in which we can ask SEB about any relevant subject. I think this is a vital way to begin to hold SEB to account. In addition, I will request the CNAG to review the recruitment process of the new CEO as it has been undertaken this year. Whether she chooses to do that or not is entirely in her gift. From there, we States members will be able to bring the much needed reforms to SEB, which in many members and islanders' eyes is not a body that is succeeding. We must also look at the Appointments Commission. In my view, it has overseen the cronyism of the last few years, something which it is expressly meant to prevent. In my eyes, it is failing. Sir, it brings me no satisfaction to withdraw my proposition, but for the good of the island, I must do so. I apologise to those members who have prepared for this debate, but I hope they understand. I also apologise to those islanders who see the problems with SEB and JAC and who hope that this proposition would help deal with those. To those islanders, I say this. This proposition was not designed to deal with those failings. It was always and solely about avoiding an unnecessary gamble. Other future propositions will have to be used for reform of SEB and reform of the JAC. Sir, I would like to finish by saying that we must welcome the new CEO and help her lead the civil service with the humility and skill that this island expects. I'd also like to recognise the excellent work of the interim CEO. He has shown us all how the civil service can be led. He has set an example and a benchmark which must be followed. He has gone about this work with a true understanding of what it is to be a servant of the government, the Assembly, and this wonderful island. I ask the Chief Minister to continue working with him productively and to do everything to ensure that there is no instability in the handover to the new CEO and the new government next year. Sir, I hope my thoughts on this complex situation have been understood by the Assembly and islanders. I'm sorry to have to do this, sir, but I must withdraw my proposition.
Well, Deputy, thank you very much. You are entitled to withdraw unilaterally your proposition, and it is accordingly withdrawn.
Sir, may I say a couple of words?
I'm afraid not. There's no locker for doing so, Chief Minister.
So I did ask for a point of clarification.
I'm afraid, point of clarification, if the debate had been taking place to continue,
Also,
you would
the
have
deputy
had.
made some very disparaging, I think even really terrible remarks about the SEB acting illegally or.
No,
Okay.
I'm so sorry. There is no locus. The deputy has made a speech which was not, to my mind, contravening standing orders, and he has, as he is entitled to under standing orders, withdrawn the proposition. A member can withdraw the proposition at any time prior to the opening of the debate, and that only takes place after it's been seconded. So that is the position, I'm afraid. Point of order, Deputy Young.
Yes, sir. I understand your ruling on this, sir, but obviously we have gone through a period where the Solicitor General was asked to advise on quite a lot of very substantial points promoting comments from members. And I really do wonder whether there should be some way in which members can express their views on this, and not to on the proposition, but where this leaves us in frankly in a mess procedurally.
There is, of course, always the mechanism of seeking an in-committee debate on any particular subject, but at the business of the Assembly, as it is presently constituted, as it is presently dealing with matters, is to resolve propositions, and this is a proposition which has now been withdrawn. I see no difficulty if you wish, or any other member wishes, to bring a proposition for an in-committee debate on general matters relating to the functioning of SEB, then there is no reason why it should not do so. But I don't think the context in these circumstances, there cannot simply be an open forum for members to stand up and express their points of view. Point of order, Deputy Tadier.
Thanks. So I think it's a point of order, maybe procedural, but could you confirm that if the Chief Minister wishes to respond in some way, he has the avenue of lodging a statement to the Assembly, which can then be questioned if he feels the need to respond?
That is procedurally correct, provided the notice provisions are complied with, then the Chief Minister can make a statement in his capacity as chair of the SEB, and he can be questioned by members for a 15-minute period on it. Yes, very well. The next item is States meetings moved to a 3-weekly cycle. P74, it's a reissue lodged by the Privileges and Procedures Committee, and I ask the greffier to read the proposition.
The States are asked to decide whether they have opinion to refer to their Act of 25th September 2020, which authorised the trial of a 3-weekly sit-in cycle of the States during 2021, and to agree that meetings of the Assembly should in future follow a 3-weekly cycle, with meetings in 2022 to be held in accordance with the schedule contained in Appendix A of this proposition.
Yes, Deputy Alves.
Thank you, sir. Sorry, my can you hear my dog in the background, or?
I think yes, we can, but it's not so intrusive that I would have to have it removed from the Assembly.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you, sir. This proposition proposes that meetings of the Assembly should in the future follow a 3-week cycle. Members will recall that in 2020, the Assembly agrees to enter into a trial period for a 3-weekly sitting cycle for States proceedings. Part B of that proposition requested PPC to bring forward for debate any proposals to permanently alter the frequency of future States meetings, having monitored the impact of the trial. The committee had previously agreed to undertake a consultation exercise at the 6-month stage in order to ensure a sufficient period of time had passed for members to take an informed view on the new model and in order to gather measurable data. Members will see that they've recently received an email this morning. I apologise for the delay in that, but the paper that has been circulated to States members sets out the data that we gathered, which includes a range of statistics over the years from 2015 to 2021. Our consultation involved writing to the Council of Ministers, a Scrutiny Liaison Committee, Committee to Conatab and the Interim Chief Executive for their views. We also sent out a survey to members asking a simple yes or no question of whether the 3-week cycle should become a permanent fixture for the state's meetings. The survey also provided the option for members to add any comments they wished to make. In terms of the survey results, 25 members responded in total, 14 in favour of the 3-week cycle and 11 were against. In addition, the committee received a range of views, both for and against the 3-week cycle. On behalf of PPC, I'd like to thank all of those who responded to the consultation and for taking the time to provide comments. Unfortunately, the main outcome was that it did not result in a clear direction from members as to whether to continue with the 3-week cycle or revert back to the 2-week cycle. The feedback we received was that some members believe the 3-week cycle enables more time to prepare for sittings and for scrutiny and constituency work in the weeks between sittings. On the other hand, some members believe that the 3-week cycle has reduced the accountability of government to both the Assembly and the public. In terms of scrutiny, one panel fed back to us that the 2-week cycle offered more opportunity to call in propositions at a faster rate than the 3-week cycle. Given the almost 50-50 split in views, we decided to lodge this proposition so that members can debate the matter and reach a conclusion as to the preferred way forward. Members will have seen that the proposition includes a schedule of meetings for 2022 for both the 2-week cycle and the 3-week cycle, and we hope that this will assist members during the debate. If the Assembly votes to reject the proposition, we will remain on the 3-week cycle for the rest of the year, as has been agreed, and revert back to a 2-week cycle next year. In terms of the standing order amendments that were made to the systems of both oral and written questions, PPC will revisit these should members reject this proposition. We will consider whether or not they should remain in place or whether they should revert back to how they were before the 3-week trial was implemented. Following the debate today and its outcome, PPC will present a confirmed schedule of meetings for 2022 before the end of this month. Sir, I make the proposition.
Is the proposition seconded? Does any member
Yes,
wish
sir.
to speak? Thank you. Does any member wish to speak on the proposition? No member wishes to speak on the proposition? Deputy Ward.
Thank you, sir. Sorry, this isn't working very well. I think being sat in the chamber with the laptop on is very confusing. So I just wanted to say a few things, and I was hope other members would say a few things on what their opinion on the 3-week cycle. First of all, I think in terms of, I think there's an irony of the consultation and whether it worked, getting so little response because people are probably so busy and not sure as to what they judge it on in such a short time. So I think that's a really real difficult one, and that's not to blame anybody for that. It's just the reality of what's happened. I have concern. I didn't vote for the 3-week cycle before, and I think the reasons why I haven't changed that much. One is that there does certainly seem to be a loss of accountability for government. We have a short time for questions. We have questions without notice, of course, and we question the Chief Minister for 15 minutes once every, well, it says a 3-week cycle, but sometimes those gaps in between can be much longer than 3 weeks. With half terms and Easter breaks and so on, it could be 4 or 5 weeks. And so one of the issues we have on this island is not engaging people in the processes of this assembly. And I don't think we're going to improve that by having less engagement in the processes of this assembly publicly. Scrutiny, of course, we want more time for scrutiny, and I would praise scrutiny panels and certainly praise those who take the extra work of chairing a panel, because it's an enormous amount of extra work. And yes, we certainly need more time to do that. But what I'm fearful of in supporting this is that we will feel that we have addressed the issue of how to improve the amount of time we have to serve constituents, undertake scrutiny, scrutinise the government and question government simply by giving more time in between sittings. When I suppose, sir, the phrase is the elephant in the room that we've never addressed is the massive inequity in resourcing between those that are provided for our government and ministers, and that itself may not be adequate. And I would suggest, if you want a ministerial government to do a good job, it's got to be allowed to, and given the resources to do that. I have no problem with that. That makes it more accountable, and then people can make judgments as to whether they want that government or another one. But sir, as a non-executive member, a backbencher away from scrutiny, and I'll come on to scrutiny in a moment, there are zero resources for us to undertake. And I think the only way in which you're going to improve that is to have proper constituency resources for members who are elected, so that we know where your constituents know where you are and can get help. And those should be staffed constituency offices, so that every member of your constituency know where you are and can go and ask for that help. And so I think that unless we address that issue, the issue of just giving simply more time between sittings could be seen as a solution to a problem that is not being solved. And therefore, we should not conflate these two, i.e., this is why I'm getting back on the point, sir. I think you may be thinking I'm going. This is why supporting this does not solve the issue that I believe it is intended to solve. That's why I make that point. So I have an issue with the written questions as well, which seem to have, to a large extent, disappeared into the ether. I had a conversation with a member of the Assembly today where I put a question into, who said to me, "We are getting your answer to you. I'm not sure when they're due." And I said, "I'm not sure when they're due either. It would just be nice to have an answer. Thank you very much." It was a very polite conversation, sir, but I think the process of written questions and when they're coming back to us, and most importantly, publicly, has not been addressed. And indeed, sir, if you go on to the States Members website and look at the questions that are asked, only the first 20 questions that you have asked as written questions are there. And so that issue has not been addressed either. So a 3-week cycle may be a great idea if in the background we had a much more open, accessible accessibility and engagement from the public, so that every piece of work that we do in this assembly, it can be seen, can be examined, can be scrutinized by the public to see whether we're doing the work that people think we should be doing. And I, for one, if I'm honest, sir, get fed up with some comments, which are made just jokingly, I'm sure. "Oh, what is it that you do?" Because actually, I think myself and other members are extremely busy and work extremely hard in the role that we have, trying to do the very best that we can. So in terms of a 3-week cycle, I'm not so sure whether the trial has proved any improvement, shown any improvement to what we're doing. I'm not sure, sir, whether the trial has shown an increase in accountability in any way, and whether it's actually gone the other way and decreased accountability for government publicly. I know it's a complete pain for ministers to get questions. I know it really, and some of us ask many more questions in this assembly than others. But sir, that is part of our democracy, so that we are publicly holding to account the decision-making process into the future. And we need to do that, if anything, more frequently rather than less frequently. If we were to move to a 3-week cycle for business in terms of propositions, then I could say fine. If that accompanied by perhaps a bi-weekly or a weekly short session of questioning, for example, because then that public questioning of ministers and in this assembly would be there, but we don't. We put the two together, and so we have lessened the ability to ask those public questions. So sometimes I think it's a shame we can't speak twice in one of these debates, because there are things that I know will come up from debate. No one else wanted to speak, so I went first, and I'm sure something else will come up. But so I really hope that we consider really carefully as to whether we want to continue with this experiment what the positive outcomes have been, which I really can't see, or whether we go back as we come up to the election, where that scrutiny within this assembly is so vital, so that people can see what we do, how we do it, and hold people to account. So at this moment, I again will not vote for the 3-day cycle. But there is part of me that could be convinced. It's only a small part, though, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Pamplin.
I meant a 3-week cycle, so I must have apologised. Let's not get that wrong. Thank you, Deputy.
Deputy Pamplin.
Thank you, sir. I also didn't vote for this trial last time. I wasn't convinced that the impacts will be universally beneficial to all parts of this assembly. So I was a little disappointed that part of the proposition didn't come with a full analysis of the impacts of this 3-week trial. So I can interject some from my experience of scrutiny. We have quarterly hearings, so with the Social Security Minister and the Health Minister on the panel I sit on. And it's fair to say the scrutiny work of the Health Minister has been essential with the ongoing pandemic and other big programs in play. We had a quarterly hearing in May, we had a quarterly hearing only recently, and it was a long time between that. And obviously with the 3-week cycle, and as Deputy Ward mentioned, half term, Easter, and then the summer recess. Whereas we usually get through our scrutiny process, it is becoming aware that we run out of time with the amount of questions that we just don't have the time to fulfill in that scrutiny hearing. So our increase of writing letters as a part of a scrutiny process to the Minister to answer the questions we have, because we have another 3 weeks of the state sitting or whenever the next quarterly hearing, has increased. And I know we have, as part of our process with both the ministers we scrutinise, have increased those questioning through letters. And of course, that does build more work for us and obviously the ministers who have been under great pressures with their workloads, who then have to respond to our questions. So I'm seeing that's not a benefit of this 3-week cycle, because if we had one extra week to bring those questions, we would be able to continue that. And I think that would take the burden down. Secondly, it's the public test, which I know sometimes we make decisions here, which is not about being popular. They sometimes have to be necessary, and sometimes the nuances of the work of the Assembly is difficult to get across. But I've not met one member of the public who's come up to me and said, "Oh, that's really great that you this process of not meeting every 3 weeks." I think a lot of people just have always felt uneasy with their Parliament not meeting more frequently to hold the government and all of us to account. So that's an ongoing process for the public. And equally, the other thing, looking to the future, and it doesn't really matter, sir, if we do the 2 weeks or 3 weeks, we have a huge amount of policy propositions we understand coming our way. And today we haven't really done much policy debating. It's all been in-house. Motion of censure, a CEO proposition that we didn't debate, and now we're debating another procedural matter. The island wants to see this Assembly debating proposition and policy that affects the day-to-day lives to improve their lives. And we're not doing that today so far. And I know the irony of me talking in that debate could be thrown at me. But equally, there is a lot of big policy we understand. There's the hospital budgeting debate. There's going to be the government plan. We know there's a population migration policy coming. And then as we look to the looming deadline of 2 weeks of the island plan in March, there is a lot of work coming to this Assembly. And does this really help that process? I'm not convinced. And then equally, if you look at the schedule, this sitting Assembly, last date in this Parliament doing this process finishes on the 29th of April, then that's it. The new States Assembly convenes on the 5th of July. Then there's the processes of election, the Chief Minister, Ministers, Scrutiny Chairs, Scrutiny Panels, Committee Members, and then it's the summer. The next Assembly, there won't be another sitting in this Assembly to question and to bring forward debates till September the 13th. So a period of question time will be on the 27th of April. The next one won't be to the September the 14th, as the consequences of the election being held in June, then coming into summer. Those sort of things doesn't sit right with me, and I don't think that would sit right with many of us. that the public wants to see, as soon as an election happens, the elected representatives of this island getting to work, being held account, and bringing the situations. It's unfortunate way how this has played out, but I feel very uneasy. And I just have echoes, even though I wasn't a states member of the time, the last date of this previous assembly and the previous chair, president of the assembly, just admonishing how much was being rushed through. And I just think it will look like lessons haven't been learned. And so for all those reasons, I think retrospectively, I think not enough evidence has been shown that it's improved the whole workings of this assembly not to meet every 2 weeks and to meet as many as often as we can to hold this assembly to account. So again, I still can't vote for the trial, and that's why I won't be voting that way. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Deputy. Guy Tarbison, one.
Thank you, sir. I listened with interest to the two previous speakers and have, as a new member, observed the two types assembly in action, and I think there are some points that need to be made. I think in terms of propositions, whereas with a 2-week cycle we probably spent 1 or 2 days here, it's undoubtedly true that with a 3-week cycle we tend to spend at least three days working our way through public business. So I think in terms of time spent on public business, probably about the same if you add up the hours that are spent on it. I think where things haven't worked properly, and often I agree with Deputy Ward, would have smiled at that comment. The written questions seem to, in my mind, have always fallen apart. I have no idea what the cycle is, when a question is going to be answered, and when to put one in. Whereas with the previous process, written questions were originally, when I first arrived in the Assembly, we went through in detail by the chair, and we knew where they were. We knew when the answers had to be in. Now I'm never quite sure whether we're dealing with the questions that were asked the previous week at the current Assembly or one that was 2 weeks ago. And it's perhaps me, I just get confused with where we are with that. I think also Deputy Ward makes a good point in terms of oral questions. As a member of the government, we are held to account by oral questions, and there's no doubt with the 3-week cycle, there's less opportunity for members to put questions to us, and I'm not sure that's necessarily a good thing. I'm sure my colleagues back at Broadstreet will curse me for saying so, because there is an inordinate amount of work involved in answering an oral question. But nevertheless, I think members should have the opportunity to hold us to account through the oral question process. So on balance, I'm inclined to support going back to a 2-week cycle. Yes, it's good in some respects as a member of the government because you have an extra week to do some of the other government work that you have to do. And there's no doubt that preparing for an assembly involves a fair amount of work as a member. And if you add an extra week in, if you reduce the period by a week, then you're increasing your workload. But nevertheless, I think the benefits of a 2-week assembly outweigh the disadvantages. So I would be inclined to support going back to it. Thank you, sir.
Very much. Can I talk, Deputy Higgins?
Thank you, sir. I'll be exceptionally brief because I don't believe in repeating what others have said. I happen to agree with all the speakers who believe we should go back to the 2-week cycle. I think it's been a retrograde step, and I look forward to, I hope the Assembly will support going back to it and look forward to getting back to business as normal. Thank you.
Deputy, does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? Chief Minister.
Yes, I'll give a slightly contrary view to the people who've just spoken, sir. And actually what I want to do is remind members, and it is actually sometimes the experience we've had, I suppose, looking back as well. And in my case, I think it's coming up to about 16 years. And it is difficult in this particular assembly because also we've had the disruptions of COVID, which has not given us a clear view as to what if you like, a normal cycle is, and to an extent we're still experiencing that. What I thought was helpful, sir, and I actually reminded of a memo, sir, that was produced by the then Greffier of the States. I don't actually know, yes, I do, sir. It was back more than 10 years ago. And it was when, I'm presuming, there was it was to the chairman and members of the States Business Organisation subgroup. And the point was, I hope I don't know if it's appropriate to name the predecessors, but hopefully for older more longer serving members, they will know exactly who I'm referring to, hopefully. And what he says is that I would offer the view that what everyone is seeking is a way to improve the efficiency what might be described as the overall, in inverted commas, government machine in Jersey. I would include in that definition the meetings of the States Assembly itself, the meetings and operation of the Council of Ministers, work undertaken by ministers, the work of scrutiny panels, and the Public Accounts Committee, and just as importantly, the work that individual members do in their own right. This could include their constituency work, general research, and other matters such as lodging propositions for debate. I believe it is therefore important that any proposals to, in inverted commas, increase efficiency in the Assembly are designed so that they lead to an improvement in the performance of the whole operation of the government machine in Jersey. And then he goes on to cover various other areas. The matter I wish to raise with you concerns the scheduling of states meetings during the year. As you know, the states currently meet in what is generally a fortnightly cycle throughout certain periods of the year, working around school holidays and other matters such as bank holidays, which sometimes mean there is a longer or shorter gap between meetings than the standard 2-week cycle. The perception I've had during the last few months is that members and officers have found themselves on what could be described as a treadmill during each parliamentary session. By coincidence, I began preparing the submission during a period of what was part of a 3-week gap. And I've found that the last 2 weeks have had a very different feel to them when compared to a normal gap between state sittings, and members and officers have also commented on this to me too. Members are normally on a constant 2-week cycle, with 1 week spent in the States for a 2 or 3 day meeting, and the next week catching up with scrutiny meetings, council ministers meetings, constituency matters, etc. As officers here in the States Griff, we find the week between States meetings taken up with finalising the minutes in Hansard from the previous week, while spending Monday dealing with written questions and Thursday with oral questions and the order paper the following week, not to mention the ongoing work of dealing with propositions, reports, etc. I am constantly hearing from many members that they are so busy that they feel they are neglecting some aspects of their duties. And this has led me to consider whether a different cycle of states meetings would be of benefit to all. He then starts talking through time periods, but then says, I therefore considered whether a 3-week cycle of meetings would be a possibility. And he talks about the benefits of concentrating sittings in 1 week and making that the focus of the week. He then talks about actually longer gaps that we have in sittings anyway, when actually government isn't held into account, for example, in the summer recess. And so I think the point was that I make that as somebody who was a long observer of the activities of the states, who in fact in that position I would suspect would also have been an experienced hand of someone who'd seen the committee system as well, I think. And those were his observations, and that actually, sir, after my experience, both on the council minister side and on the scrutiny side, it was what I call the hamster wheel. We were getting into this position of having a weak, potentially controversial of the states. You then were literally, depending where you were and depending how long that system had been, you came out of the states as a backbencher or even as an assistant minister. You were getting your written questions in place for the Monday. You were then trying to work out and getting your oral questions in place for the Thursday, and then you were back in the States the following week. And actually, it may well have changed, but certainly from my experience, within all that lot, you were trying to work around getting good preparation for scrutiny hearings and holding obviously ministers to account. And obviously on the other side, sir, I was acutely aware that of the work and issues of trying to deal with a government business in terms of either trying to respond, bearing in mind the debates we've had earlier today, to assembly business, but also the issues of trying to do government business as well. And actually that couples with both sides, particularly as the work of the assembly and the government has changed significantly, I think, even in my time. We have a lot more engagement off island, and also the ability, obviously, which has always been there, which I highly commend, for panels themselves to go off island if they want to and do visits to sites and things like that, or to learn from other jurisdictions and whatever aspect they are looking at. And the point we're being is that having, in general, a 2-week gap between those two sittings, to me, gave a much more considered period. Now, obviously, caveat this, it doesn't necessarily feel like that at the moment, because essentially COVID has landed and has, as I said in the past, sucked out a lot of time and resource when we've been focusing so much on that from both sides of the Assembly, and obviously then we've not necessarily seen that it got into that pattern, that rhythm. I have some sympathy for what Deputy Ward has said in terms of written questions, in terms of how they're publicised and all that type of stuff. That's frankly is a matter for PPC and the Assembly, if you see what I mean. Oh, sorry, members see what I mean. And that can very, very easily be addressed. I absolutely also agree that, and I think there are measures in place that the public still don't understand what Assembly members do, what ministers do, what scrutiny does, what council ministers does. And again, sir, I understand that PPC have been putting, I've got measures in place coming down that line to try and address that. And I know in government we are also trying to do the same. That is actually around communications, that whole critical area which we won't go into, but people have many, many views on. The actual principles, though, sir, of the 3-week cycle for me has been and should be that it gives us the ability, if applied properly, to get off that hamster wheel and actually focus on doing our job for ultimately the public. And so on that basis, I do appreciate the work of PPC in bringing this. Obviously, they did ask members, and I believe the majority of members who responded are in favour of retaining the 3-week cycle. And of course, there will be members who say, well, actually, our job is in the Assembly. We've got to hold people to account, and I want to be seen to be holding people to account. And sometimes in there's a little bit of self-generating publicity as well, I would possibly suggest. But equally, sir, we all have our responsibilities in the Assembly. We have other responsibilities which are to do with our responsibility to the island as a whole. And we do need to, in my view, we need to recognise that as we perform our duties, whichever role we hold, as I said, ultimately for the good of the island. I do think the 3-week cycle needs longer to run, to be honest, to bed down. And I think there are always improvements in that. But for me, sir, I would heartily commend retaining the 3-week cycle, certainly up to the elections, and then essentially have a good assessment, because hopefully by then we will also be back to what I will call normality, and hopefully not having to deal with further issues that come out of the pandemic, which do have an impact on the resources we can apply and the time we spend in addressing issues to do with the Assembly and our normal business. On that basis, I personally I will be voting for the proposition, and I hope members will take those comments on board. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Point of clarifications.
So it should normally come in through the machine if we're going to permit any points of clarification. But as you let us know, Conor, point of clarification.
Thank you, sir. Sorry about that. Not used to it yet. The Chief Minister seemed to imply that people ask questions for self-publication. Does it include himself when he was a backbencher when he asked questions in that comment?
Absolutely, sir.
Very well. Thank you, Chief Minister. Deputy of St Martin.
Thank you, sir. And in my first term in office as a States member, I chaired a scrutiny panel and vice chaired another. My second term, I was a minister in government, and I absolutely recognise when the Chief Minister talks about the continuous nature, the treadmill nature of on-off 2-week cycles of spending a week in the States Assembly and the following week catching up with all your ministerial or scrutiny duties, and then before you know it, finding yourself back in the States Assembly again. So I do recognise the need to be in the Assembly, but there's no doubt in my mind that, with the exception of written questions, which I accept haven't gone well, we do spend proportionately more time in the Assembly on oral questions, and proportionally it's the same, if you like. There's no doubt in my mind, after having spent some time on the 3-week cycle, I wonder how and I know I don't work as hard as some others, but I wonder how I would fit everything back into a fortnightly cycle, especially with the work of the Planning Committee taking complete full days out of your diary. It would be quite challenging to go back. and certainly would mean I would have to compromise either some of my planning work or some of my one of the two scrutiny panels that I sit on. So for that point of view, I say to members, I have found the 3-week cycle far more efficient, a far better use of my time, and a far better way to get through more work. And I would urge them to support this proposition. Thank you, sir.
Very much, Deputy. Senator Moore.
Thank you, sir. I no longer wish to contribute.
Thank you, Deputy Southern.
Thank you, sir. And I too will be brief on this particular topic. I absolutely abhor the 3-week cycle. It's correct to say that detail questions have disappeared from being logged properly and analysed properly, so that people who are most important in the system, the voters out there, don't know quite what we're doing. I see no advantage in the 3-week cycle over the 2-week cycle. It establishes a regular rhythm, which is far easier to get onto. And I want urgently to return to the 2-week system where we can get rhythm going that's effective and efficient in the best possible sense. So I'll be voting straightforwardly to return to the 2-week cycle. The only thing it's made easier by a 3-week rather than a 2-week cycle is the planning of holidays. That's the only advantage I can see of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Gardner.
Thank you, sir. I'll breathe and before I start to speak. We all been elected to represent our constituencies, and we do have 3 main duties, which I personally trying to balance. One of them is to help our constituents, really to find solution to wide range of issues, from road safety to social security benefit, bus routes, and various things. Second, it's being part of decision-making process and to be in the States Assembly and examine what government is doing. And the third one is scrutiny. As some members were a bit harder than others in scrutiny, and maybe if all backbenchers will join scrutiny, will be less burden on others. So I would invite during scrutiny other members as well. Going back to the 3-week cycle, as I mentioned, we have 3 parts and we have 3-week cycle, and we have to balance between all 3 of them. And I, as Deputy of St. Martin mentioned, if I'm going back to 2 weeks, I have no idea how we'll continue to have the same amount of the public hearings, which from my perspective, this is also holding government to account and asking valid questions and to receive answers. I would like to just share with members that tomorrow, when I look into tomorrow, we'll have state sitting. We didn't have any other choice to have a public hearing start at 5:30 and to finish at 7 to be able to produce our report on time. And I just received last night an email from my constituency asking to join at 7:30 to very urgent matters that I have to address, and I cannot say no. We also, and don't forget, we're also all people and we need to balance, and I basically on that day need to say apologies to my constituents that I'll probably not be able to reply to all emails that I receive. I agree that the written questions needs to be sorted out. And I agree with Deputy Ward, would we have constituency support, and maybe next assembly would have a constituency support, and it would be somebody who would be able to make a quick answer, to have a quick conversation with me, and to support, to answer to all constituency requests. We might be able to go to 2-week sitting, but currently, to put constituency support in place or to put the written question in place, I think to put the logistics of the written questions, it's much easier. And we have lots of disagreement with the Chief Minister, but on this particular, as everybody knows, but at this particular point, it is a way to improve our efficiency. We have to be efficient. We have to dedicate times to our scrutiny work, to our constituency work, and to our state work. So I'll be personally supporting the proposition.
Thank you, Deputy Conataba. St John.
Thank you, sir, and I will also be brief. I think more frequent meetings would be more beneficial for the Assembly. Today, the Chief Minister mentioned the impact of COVID, and I think it was probably even more important than ever that this Assembly should have met more frequently rather than less. Sir, we also heard yesterday about the desire for more collaboration, and in my opinion, this again would be helped by more frequent meetings. So if I can, I'd like to quote from the Harvard Business Review. A daily meeting is different from a weekly meeting, and a weekly meeting from a monthly one. Irregular, ad hoc, quarterly and annual meetings are different again. On the whole, the frequency of meetings defines, or perhaps even determines, the degree of unity of the group. Perhaps we should be debating shorter lunch breaks and earlier start times if people are concerned about the time they spend in this Assembly. Sir, I'll be voting for a return to the 2 weeks.
Conataba Trinity.
Thank you, sir. I will equally be brief, but unfortunately I cannot agree with the comments of the previous speaker. I have a bit of a reputation as being someone who is resistant to change, and I was reminded this morning thinking about a cartoon which appeared in the local Daily Mirror, reminding me that sometimes change can be a good thing. And I think the change to the 3-week cycle has been a good thing. From speaking personally, it has enabled me to manage my time more effectively, and I believe become a more effective constable and politician here in the Assembly. So I will be voting to maintain and stay with the 3-week cycle. Thank you, sir.
Does any other member wish to speak on the proposition? No other member wishes to speak? Deputy Young.
Sorry, sir, I'll be very brief. I've struggled which way to go on this all along. I've never been comfortable at the start with the move to 3 weeks, because I absolutely agree the points that Deputy Ward and others made about the importance of questioning. And I do think the written question rule has completely failed. I don't know whether it is, it's too complicated. I learned today about, we had some very kind figures circulated around from the GREF, and they talk about, identified that Article 12 gives some kind of procedure in writing where if a written question doesn't meet the provide the answer properly, you have certain responsibilities to deal with that. I had no idea we had such processes, and frankly, I agree with the Constable of St Wand that I have no idea about where this timetable is. But so I think whatever happens, I think I'd ask PPC. Well, if we stick with the 3 weeks, I'd like PPC to revisit this written replies, because it isn't good. But having said all that, I absolutely believe that the 3 week cycle has got the benefit of allowing us to do the work responsibilities we have. And listening to Deputy Gardner, absolutely, a very, very busy member, chairman of PAC and so on. It really is extraordinarily important to be able to spread the time between those various roles. For me as a minister, I don't know, I think I'd kind of almost taken for granted that the 3 week cycle during the last year has freed up time for do all the policy work that I've had to do and others with the officers on the island plan. And I know Deputy Guida is working on the carbon neutral policy. We've got a mountain of work to do, and I think going back to the 2 week on balance would be a retrograde thing. I think it becomes just like a treadmill. 1 week Council of Ministers, 1 week states, and trying to cram things in the gaps in between. So I prefer, sir, that we stick with the 3 weeks, but I do think the points members have made about this written question issue. Maybe some of it is because these answers don't get published and nobody knows when they're going to be published. There needs to be some clearer procedure on that, sir. But I think on balance, the 3 weeks. Thank you.
Very much, Deputy Labby.
Well, just picking up on that last point first, sir. I think where I think PPC are getting the message about the written question issue, and there's no reason why we can't return. Obviously, we divorced the written questions from the Assembly sittings. There's no reason why we can't return them to couple them back up again. And I think I'm pretty sure that the rest of PPC would be happy to look at that. Just a quick thing on the election timetable for Deputy Pamplin, whether we're in a 2-week or 3-week cycle, the election timetable is dictated by other things and doesn't really, either 2 or 3 weeks doesn't affect it. We're into a rather more extraordinary situation, and once every 4 years with that, and other factors come into play about when the Assembly sittings are. I guess this is about I guess for members, and I'm so pleased that some of them who were sceptical when I proposed this have said to me in the last few months that they wouldn't want to go back, and they've now accepted that it is given them more time to do their work. I'm still convinced that this is much more productive. I think the sittings are spaced out, and as they have been, our state sittings have improved. I was convinced that this would be more family friendly, and I think it has been. I think we've practically eradicated those dreadful 5:30 discussions about whether to go on or whether to finish. There's a more relaxed
3-week sessions.
I'm sorry, I can't. Somebody was interrupting, I think.
No, I couldn't hear an interruption.
Sorry, I'll continue. So I think the longer week of sittings has given us a more relaxed attitude in that respect. We more often not know that we'll be sitting the following day, so to have a 5:30 discussion about whether to go to 6:30 or 7:30 is futile. And I hope other members recognise that too. So and those are always painful and don't show us in a good light. And I think, as I say, we've practically eradicated those. So I think PPC would be open to trying anything, and it's down to people's own personal beliefs. And it's interesting to hear both Deputy Gardner and Deputy St Martin saying how now we're going to fit into 1 week what we do in 2. And I having sat in the planning committee, I take his point absolutely too. It was awful. We had a state sitting, and then the planning committee week, and then another state sitting after it. It was full on. Look, there's always some sort of inference occasionally with this debate that, you know, we want the proposers of it supposedly want more time off. I think members know my work ethic. I took on 2 chairmanships at the beginning of this term, and I've taken on a ministry now, and I'm not complaining, and I like to be busy, and I like to work, and when I take on a job, I do it with enthusiasm and energy, and that's how I roll. And so, and I know how hard other members have worked, and I've always stressed that, and publicly when I was PPC chair and acting as the union rep really for states members to the public. But I think this has improved the working life of states member immeasurably. To Deputy Ward, who I thought his speech was incredibly measured and very sensible and very interesting, and I know he's been banging on about constituency officers for a long time, and I would just say that I think the last time we had him into PPC, the feeling was to the outlay and expense for, and in real estate terms and in personnel terms, to set up constituency officers. Let's say the 9 constituency officers with the new 9 districts that we've now passed. I'm not sure that would get through the Assembly, I'd say, to Deputy Ward. But I do take his point, and as PPC chair, it was something that worried me greatly. The security of members meeting constituents alone in rooms in the base, in the dungeons of the States Assembly building, with no reception. I have always been worried about that, and I'll float it publicly. I've talked about it on PPC, but I would like to see PK House brought into the family of the parliamentary group of buildings and be a resource for members of the public to meet their constituents, and for members of the states to have somewhere that has windows, that has a reception, that has meeting rooms, both one-on-one meeting rooms and upstairs with a disabled lift, meeting rooms fully kitted out for scrutiny hearings or the planning committee, etc. And I believe now it's not going to be used for the courts, it's not going to be used for something else. And I've asked PPC to put in a strong bid with Property Holdings so that we can use PK House as a resource, and it's ideally placed. So I just float that idea with Deputy Ward and wonder how he feels about that. And that's all I have to say. I do hope that we can continue with the 3-week cycle until the end of this term. There's not much difference given the island plan debate and the election. There's not a great deal of difference between a 2 and 3 cycle with 3-week cycle for the rest of this term. So the new members of the new assembly can make a decision early on in that if they want to revert back in 2023. But I'd urge members to let's keep this going until the end of this term. Thank you, sir.
Yes, thank you very much indeed. Is the adjournment proposed?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Very well, the Assembly stands adjourned until 2:50.